Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Midnight Stories. Now, I know a lot of you use these videos to fall asleep, so before you drift off, I thought it would be nice if everyone could leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from the world. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the episodes. All right, let's get comfy, relax, and begin. We had planned the hike for a few weeks. There were 6 of us, 3 guys, 3 women, all of us in our late 20s or early 30s. We knew each other through mutual friends, a mix of coworkers, and people who had met on previous hikes. We weren't all close, but we had enough shared experiences that it didn't feel awkward. The plan was simple: a 3-day, 2-night out and back hike in Washington State, deep in the woods where cell service dropped off about 30 minutes into the drive. The trail we picked wasn't a well-known one. It wasn't on any big tourist sites, and that was part of the appeal. One of the guys, Matt, had been there before. He'd hiked it the year before and talked it up. Said it had a couple of good spots to camp, a lake on the second day, and views of the hills that stretched out for miles. We trusted him. We packed light, but smart. Backpacking gear, tents, water filters, food, headlamps, and the usual safety stuff. Nothing fancy, just enough to keep us dry and fed. The first day went fine. We hit the trail mid-morning, legs fresh, talking about life and work and random stuff. The forest was beautiful. Dense firs and moss-covered ground, everything shaded and cool. The air had that smell you only get out there, damp earth, pine sap, and something old and still. We made camp before sunset at a clearing near stream, built a small fire, cooked some freeze-dried meals, and joked around until everyone crawled into their tents. The second day was tougher. The trail narrowed, the incline kicked in, and we didn't talk as much, just focused on getting through the miles. We reached the lake around late afternoon, tucked between 2 ridges. It was colder there. The wind came off the water and carried a chill through camp. But the place was perfect, quiet, no signs of other people, not even trash, just us and the sound of birds and distant wind through the trees. That night, we set up a better fire, bigger. Someone brought a flask and passed it around. We cooked again, ate slowly, and talked about the stars, the silence, and how different it all felt compared to the city. Around 10, one by one, everyone started peeling off to their tents. I stayed up a bit longer, staring at the fire and letting my eyes adjust to the dark. I liked how the shadows danced in the trees. The woods can feel both huge and small at night, like you're trapped in something endless. Around midnight, I felt the urge to take a piss. I didn't want to go right outside the tents, so I grabbed my headlamp, didn't turn it on, and walked into the woods. Just far enough for some privacy. Maybe 150, 200 yards. It wasn't a straight line. I kind of curved around, stepping over roots, avoiding the crunch of dry branches. I knew I'd be able to follow my tracks back. I wasn't worried. The forest was dark, but not pitch black. There was a half moon above the trees, and I could make out shapes well enough. I found a good spot, did my business, zipped up, and turned to go back. That's when I realized I couldn't see the fire anymore. I looked in the direction I thought camp was, but nothing stood out. No orange glow, no flicker between the trees, no voices. I waited for a second, thinking maybe I'd gone farther than I thought. I turned on my headlamp and swept it around. Tree trunks, underbrush, a few broken branches from where I'd walked through, but nothing that told me where I was. Then I heard it. Footsteps. At first, it sounded like one person. Not running, just walking, moving lightly over the forest floor. Leaves and twigs crunching just enough to hear, but not enough to give away a direction. I stood still. I figured maybe someone else had woken up and wandered out like I did. Maybe they saw my light. Maybe it was Matt or Becca or one of the others. I turned off my headlamp to see if I could spot their light. Nothing. Then the footsteps stopped. I stood there listening. I didn't call out. Something about the silence that followed made me want to stay quiet. I took a slow step backward, feeling with my heel before putting weight down, trying not to snap a twig or rustle leaves. I turned a little, trying to orient myself, but everything looked the same. Trees, brush, dirt. No landmarks. I figured I'd wait a few seconds and try to listen for camp. That's when I heard my name. At first, it was soft, like someone trying not to be too loud. Just a little louder than a whisper. Then again, a little closer. It was my name. but not quite right. The tone was off. The rhythm was wrong. It was like when you hear your own voice on a recording, familiar but hollow. It didn't sound like anyone specific, just off. It came from the direction I'd heard the footsteps. Then I heard it again from a different direction. Same voice, same wrong tone, like someone trying to sound like they knew me. I crouched down, just dropped low and turned off my light. I didn't move. My heart was pounding. Every part of my body told me not to answer, not to move, just stay still. Then I saw it. Something moved low to the ground, between two trees. It wasn't walking upright. It was crawling fast, too fast, like someone on their hands and knees who didn't care about making noise. I couldn't see its shape clearly, just the motion, a blur between trunks, then stillness. Then again, moving sideways. I don't know how far away it was, maybe 30, 40 feet, but it was quiet when it moved, like it was used to it. I kept still. My breathing was short. I wanted to run, but I didn't know where to go. I couldn't see camp. I didn't know if whatever I saw had seen me. So I stayed crouched, one hand on the ground, the other on my headlamp with my thumb hovering over the switch. It stayed quiet after that. Minutes passed, maybe longer. I lost track of time. My legs started cramping. My back ached, but I didn't move. I listened to every sound, every shift in the wind, every creak of a tree, and every once in a while, I'd hear it, my name, from somewhere nearby. Always that same voice. Not loud, not urgent, just saying it like it was trying to lure me out. At some point, I stopped hearing anything. The woods got cold. My fingers were numb. My knees throbbed. I wanted to cry, but held it in. I didn't even blink for long stretches. I just stayed low, staring at the same patch of ground. When the sky finally started to lighten, it was barely noticeable. Just a faint blue above the trees. The moon had set. I slowly stood up, legs shaking, and looked around. No movement, no sounds. The thing, or whatever it was gone. I turned my headlamp on and started retracing my steps. Not fast, just careful, looking for broken twigs, disturbed moss, marks in the dirt. I made a curved path, and I had to double back a few times when I lost it. I didn't call out. I didn't want to risk it still being out there. Eventually, I saw the edge of camp. The fire was out. The tents were still zipped up. Everything looked normal. I walked in like nothing had happened, got into my tent, and zipped it up. My hands were trembling so bad, I had to steady them against my knees. I lay down and closed my eyes. I didn't sleep, but I kept still. When everyone started waking up, I unzipped my tent and joined them like nothing was off. They were making coffee, packing up gear, talking about the hike back. No one mentioned anything strange. No one said they'd heard me leave. I asked Matt if he'd been up during the night. He said no. Same with the others. I didn't bring it up. We hiked out that day. The trail felt different. I kept glancing into the woods. Every shadow felt closer than it should be. Every snapping branch made me jump. I kept checking behind us. No one noticed. Or maybe they did and just didn't say anything. When we got back to our cars, we all said goodbye and promised to keep in touch. I drove home in silence. Didn't turn on the radio. Didn't stop until I got back to my apartment. I took a hot shower, lay on the couch, and stared at the ceiling until it got dark again. I didn't sleep that night either. In the weeks after, I tried to make sense of it. Thought maybe I'd imagined it. Maybe I'd wandered farther than I thought. Panicked when I couldn't find my way back, and hallucinated the voice. But that thing crawling through the trees, that wasn't in my head. That wasn't a dream. I've seen people crawl before. That wasn't normal movement. That was something else. I've gone hiking since then, but never alone, and never off trail. I keep thinking about how no one saw me leave. No one noticed I was gone all night. They thought I was in my tent, which means if I hadn't made it back, maybe they wouldn't have noticed at all. I was out in the Appalachians for what was supposed to be a calm weekend loop hike. I planned it for a while, nothing too crazy, just a 25-mile circuit over 2.5 days, enough to clear my head and get some time away from people. I started early on a Friday morning. The trailhead was empty except for one other car, probably someone doing a longer section. Weather was decent, partly cloudy, maybe mid-60s. The forecast didn't call for rain, and I was packed light. A single-person tent, sleeping bag, freeze-dried meals, water filter, and a small emergency kit. Day one went by without any trouble. I followed the loop as planned, made good time through a few gentle climbs and descents. The woods felt typical for the Appalachians, old growth with that mix of soft earth and exposed roots. I camped just off a ridge the first night, found a flat enough patch where I could lay down, made some instant rice, and called it a day. It got chilly fast once the sun dropped, but that was expected. The wind rustled the trees a bit overnight, but I slept all right. The next day, I broke camp around 8 a.m. and kept heading east along the loop. About 3 hours into the hike, I came to what looked like a fork in the trail. One direction continued along the obvious route, blazed and well-worn, but there was another path veering slightly to the right. It wasn't marked. No blazes on the trees, no signs, but it didn't look brand new either. Looked like a footpath, maybe an old logging route. There were even a few boot prints. I thought it might be a shortcut or side trail that reconnected later. I'd seen a few like that before, unofficial paths made by hunters or locals. I figured I'd take it. It was heading in the general direction I wanted to go, and I had GPS, a compass, and a paper map just in case. Worst case, I'd backtrack. So I stepped off the main trail and followed it. At first, the path was clear enough. Narrow, but not overgrown. The leaves on the ground had been walked on recently. Some crushed down, twigs snapped. I didn't feel anything strange yet, just the usual silence of the deep woods. No highway noise, no planes, just wind in the canopy and the occasional bird call. The trail dropped into a shallow hollow, then started climbing again. The further I went, the more the forest changed. It got darker, not because of the weather. There were still gaps in the clouds, but the trees were denser here, taller, and the underbrush started to choke the path. Still, I pushed forward. I figured I'd already come a half-mile down this track, and going back would waste time. Then I stopped seeing any boot prints. The trail turned soft, like it hadn't been used in years. Moss grew right across the footpath. Cobwebs stretched between branches at knee height. It felt like I was pushing into a part of the forest that didn't want visitors. The quiet got heavier. No more birds. No insects. Just wind, barely there. I should have turned around. I know that now. But something about the way the trail wound ahead, like it was always just about to open up, kept me going. That's when I found the shack. It was tucked in a thicket of rhododendrons, nearly invisible until I was almost on top of it. The wood was gray and soft with rot, the roof sagging inward. Windows were broken out, shards of glass scattered on the mossy ground. One of the shutters hung by a single rusted hinge. A tree had grown close to one wall, forcing the boards to bow outward. The door wasn't locked. It wasn't even closed. It leaned open, held in place by debris on the floor. I stepped in, just a few feet. I had my hiking pole in one hand, a flashlight in the other. It wasn't dark inside, but the shadows were deep. The air smelled like mold, wet wood, and something else metallic dry. Dust maybe, or rust. Inside, there was almost nothing. Just a single wooden chair facing the doorway, and a fireplace filled with ash and bone. The bones were long, some curled, some cracked. I didn't get close enough to tell what kind. I didn't touch anything. I didn't sit. I just stood there for maybe 20 seconds, then stepped back out into the trees. My chest was tight, and I was breathing like I'd just run up a hill. I kept walking. Faster now. The trail, if you could even call it that anymore, kept going, winding downhill, and I followed it without thinking. I wasn't sure if it would reconnect with the main trail, but I didn't want to backtrack past that shack. Eventually, the trees thinned a little, and I found a clearing. Not a proper campsite, but flat enough, and I was running out of daylight. I didn't want to keep walking with night coming on. I pitched my tent, boiled water for a quick meal, and forced myself to eat. My nerves were shot. I'd felt uneasy in the woods before, bad weather, close bear encounters, but this was different. The kind of feeling that creeps in from the back of your brain and settles behind your ribs. I didn't build a fire. I just sat in the tent, tried to calm down, listening. But there was nothing to hear. No owls, no leaves rustling, just complete silence, like a vacuum had swallowed up the forest. Even my own movements sounded muffled. That's what finally made me realize I was holding my breath over and over and barely exhaling. I laid down eventually, but I didn't sleep. I just stared at the roof of the tent, waiting for something to happen, waiting for movement outside or a sound. And sure enough, sometime past midnight, I don't know exactly when, I heard the bell. Just one ring. It wasn't close, maybe a couple 100 feet away, but it wasn't a cowbell or a wind chime. It was heavy, solid, the kind of bell you'd hear in an old schoolhouse or hanging from a church tower. It rang once, clear, sharp, then nothing. I sat up, heart pounding, and didn't move again. I didn't turn on my headlamp. I didn't unzip the tent. I just sat there, waiting, straining to hear anything else. But the bell didn't ring again. I stayed like that until first light. At dawn, I packed everything in less than 10 minutes. Didn't eat, didn't filter water, didn't even lace my boots right. I just threw everything into my pack and started walking back the way I came. I didn't want to risk going further down that path. I didn't care where it led anymore. I wanted out. The trail was harder to follow going uphill. The moss and roots were slick, and I kept slipping, falling forward into brambles. I cut my palm on a sharp rock, bled through the gauze of my kit. My legs ached and my lungs burned, but I didn't stop. When I finally reached the fork where I'd left the marked trail, I almost cried. I turned left back toward the main loop and didn't look back. That night, I stayed in a proper campsite. Fire ring, other hikers nearby, the works. I didn't talk to anyone. I just sat near the fire and stared into it, my whole body sore. When I got back home a day later, I opened up my GPS track and loaded it into a mapping app. I wanted to see how far off course I'd gone. The line traced neatly for most of the loop, then veered off sharply to the east into what looked like a blank section of forest. I pulled up topo maps, satellite imagery, even LiDAR overlays from Forest Service database. There was nothing there. No trail, no old roads, not even a clear break in the canopy. The section I walked didn't exist on any of the maps I checked. Not recent ones, not old ones. I zoomed in on the point where I found the shack. There was no clearing, no signs of structure, just solid tree cover. Same with the place I camped. The clearing I remembered was just part of the tree line. As far as any record showed, that stretch of forest was untouched. I've done plenty of backpacking since then, but I've never gone back to that part of the Appalachians. I still don't know what I found out there. I don't try to explain it anymore. I don't tell people what I think it was, because I don't know. It wasn't ghosts or demons or anything supernatural. I didn't see anything. I didn't hear voices, but something was wrong out there. Wrong in a way that doesn't need a name. Sometimes places just feel bad, and when they do, you leave. I was lucky enough to get out. That's all that matters. Two years ago, I went camping with my cousin in northern Minnesota. We wanted to get away for a while, really unplug. Life had been busy, and this trip felt like a way to hit reset. We picked a weekend in early fall when the leaves were turning and the nights were cold enough to keep the bugs away, but not so cold it was miserable. We'd done trips like this before, mostly in state parks or campgrounds, but this time we wanted something deeper, quieter. We studied some old topo maps and chose a spot near a small lake far from any marked trail. It took us half a day of hiking to get there. The place was beautiful. The lake was still, untouched. Not a sign of human activity. No wrappers, no fire rings, no stumps from someone cutting wood. Just forest, clean and deep. The trees were mostly birch and pine, tall and dense, with a thick layer of fallen needles and leaves that muffled every footstep. We set up our tent on a flat patch just off the lake and built a small fire ring with rocks. It felt perfect, like we'd found our own little corner of the world. We spent the day gathering wood, fishing, and just walking around. There was a stillness to the place I hadn't felt in years. No planes overhead, no traffic sounds, not even birds after a while, just the wind moving through the trees and the occasional ripple on the lake. That night, we cooked some fish over the fire and stayed up talking. The stars were clearer than I'd seen in a long time. Around midnight, we sat in silence, just listening. That was when we first heard it, a soft tapping. At first, I thought it was a woodpecker, but it was slow and spaced out. Tap, tap, pause, then again. It was coming from the trees around us, maybe 50 feet out. The sound moved, same rhythm, but from a different spot. Talp, talp, pasa. Then again, a little closer. We laughed it off, said it was just some animal or maybe even tree branches knocking together. But the way the sound traveled, it didn't feel like wind. It felt deliberate. We stood up and shined our flashlights into the woods, but the beams only lit up the first few rows of trees. Beyond that, just black. The sound stopped when the lights hit. Nothing moved. No rustle of leaves. Nothing. We added more wood to the fire, making it big. Fire felt safe. We stayed up until almost 3 a.m., both of us yawning and cold, but not wanting to be the first to go in the tent. Eventually, the fire died down enough that the cold pushed us inside. We zipped the tent tight and didn't talk much. I left the rainfly rolled up so we could see out the mesh top and watch the stars. That helped somehow. Then, maybe 30 minutes after we laid down, I heard it again. Talp, talp. It was behind the tent. Not far, maybe 10 feet. My cousin was awake too. I could feel her freeze next to me. We didn't say anything, just listened. Another tap, closer this time. Then silence. I laid there, counting heartbeats. I don't know how long we stayed like that. Eventually, I must have fallen asleep. I don't remember when, just that the tapping didn't come back. We woke up early, chilled from the damp cold that seeps in right before dawn. The fire pit was dead, and the forest was quiet. Too quiet. We walked around the tent to stretch our legs and saw them. Footprints. Human. Bare feet. They circled the tent once, maybe twice. Clear toes in the dirt. Not big, maybe a size 10, but wide. The feet weren't dirty like you'd expect if someone had been barefoot in the woods for days. Just bare. I remember crouching down, looking at them, trying to convince myself they were ours. But we'd worn boots, and the prints were too clean, too crisp. You could see the arch, the ball of the foot. We looked around for more, but they ended near a tree and just stopped. No prints leading to them. Just a circle around our tent and nothing else. We didn't talk about it much while packing up. It was one of those moments where saying anything would make it too real. The hike back felt long. Every snapped twig made us jump. We didn't stop once, didn't eat until we were back at the car. On the drive home, we finally talked. We went through the possibilities. Maybe a hiker? But who hikes that deep and barefoot? And why come up to our tent, walk in a circle, then leave without saying a word? No sign of campfires, no other tracks. Maybe a local? But the nearest road was 10 miles away. No cabins, no trails, no signs of hunting blinds. Just pure, deep woods. For weeks after, I kept thinking about it. I checked online forums, searched for stories of barefoot hermits, old legends, anything that might explain it. But nothing made sense. It was too precise, too quiet. Someone had to walk into that thick forest at night, without light, barefoot, find our tent, walk around it, and leave without a trace. What gets me still is the tapping. It moved like someone circling us slowly, keeping time. I don't know if they were hitting trees or stones, or just using a stick, but it was deliberate, measured, like they wanted us to hear it, but didn't want to be seen. We haven't been back to that area since. Not because we're scared exactly, but because the place changed after that. It wasn't the quiet retreat we thought it was. Something else was out there. Something that knew the forest better than we ever could. I still think about that night. I think about those prints. I think about the fact that they ended without a trail. No tracks leading away. Just a circle around the tent, and then nothing. I've camped since then, but never that far out. Now I stay close to trails, to other people. I carry a headlamp in my pocket, even in the daytime, and I don't sleep through the night anymore when I'm out in the woods. I listen. And sometimes, when it's quiet enough, I think I hear that tapping again. Not close, not real, just in memory. But I remember how it felt. Cold, intentional, like someone was keeping rhythm with our fear. That part doesn't go away. I was driving down a quiet stretch of highway late at night. The kind of road where you rarely see another car for miles. It was near midnight, the sky completely dark except for the pale light of the moon and the dim glow of my truck's dashboard. The highway was straight and flat, lined with tall trees on both sides, their shadows reaching toward the road like dark fingers. I was tired from a long day behind the wheel, but still alert, knowing that driving at night on empty roads had its own dangers. The hum of the engine and the soft sound of the tires rolling over the pavement were the only noises breaking the silence. The radio was off. I didn't want distractions. Just the steady rhythm of the road and the occasional flicker of headlights from distant cars. I kept my eyes on the road ahead, scanning for any signs of animals or obstacles. Then out of nowhere, a man ran right in front of my truck. He just appeared, darting out from the edge of the forest without warning. My heart jumped. I slammed my foot on the brakes and jerked the steering wheel hard to the right, swerving to avoid him. The tires screeched against the asphalt as the truck fishtailed slightly before I managed to steady it again. The man didn't stop. Instead, he kept running back and forth across the road in front of me, almost like he wanted me to hit him. At first, I thought maybe he was trying to cross the road, but the way he moved didn't make sense. He was weaving left and right, almost dancing between the lanes. He looked desperate, wild-eyed, but there was something else there too. Something cold and empty in his stare that sent a chill down my spine. I wasn't the only one who had to react. Behind me, I could see headlights flashing and hear other trucks and cars hitting their brakes hard, swerving too. Some drivers honked their horns, but the man kept moving, blocking the highway in a way that made it impossible for anyone to pass safely. It was like he was daring us, mocking us, even putting his life in our hands. I glanced in my rearview mirror and saw a line of vehicles piled up, their drivers probably just as confused and scared as I was. No one was speeding or trying to run him down. Everyone was just trying to avoid hitting him. It was one of those moments when time stretches out and everything slows down but feels sharper at the same time. My heart was pounding, sweat forming on my forehead despite the cold night air coming in through the cracked window. I kept my hands tight on the wheel, eyes locked on the man. I didn't dare try to go around him. The shoulder was narrow and rough, full of gravel and debris. It wasn't safe to pull over either, not with him blocking the road like that. I tapped my horn a few times, hoping to scare him off, but it didn't work. Instead, he stopped running for a moment and looked right at me. His face was pale and streaked with dirt, his clothes torn and dirty, like he'd been living rough for a long time. There was no recognition in his eyes, no sign that he knew what he was doing. Just a blank, eerie focus. Then he started running again, faster this time, back and forth across the lanes. I felt a surge of anger mixed with fear. Why was he doing this? Was he drunk? Was he trying to hurt himself or others? Was there something wrong with him? I couldn't understand it. I finally managed to get my phone out and call the police. I kept the truck idling in the middle of the road, making sure I didn't hit him while I spoke. I told him exactly where I was, describing the man and his strange behavior. The dispatcher sounded concerned and promised to send someone out quickly. But even after I hung up, the man was still there, moving like a ghost trapped on the pavement. The minutes dragged on. Other drivers started inching their way backward, trying to turn around and find another route. I stayed put, watching the man closely, not trusting him or the situation at all. I had no way to predict what he might do next. His wild pacing was hypnotic and terrifying. Eventually, I heard sirens far down the road, the flashing blue and red lights reflecting off the trees. The man stopped again and turned his head toward the lights. For a brief moment, I thought maybe he would surrender or at least stop causing chaos. But instead, he sprinted toward the trees, disappearing into the darkness as quickly as he had appeared. The police arrived moments later, their headlights cutting through the night like sharp blades. I told the officers what I saw, pointing toward where the man had gone. They said they'd search the area and warn me to stay put until it was safe. I waited for what felt like hours, but no one found him. The officers came back shaking their heads, saying there was no sign of anyone out there. No footprints, no tracks, nothing. The highway was empty again, quiet except for the hum of my truck. After a while, I started my engine and continued down the road, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The whole scene stuck in my mind. The man's strange running, his empty eyes, the way he vanished without a trace. I thought about what could make someone act like that in the middle of nowhere at midnight. I kept replaying the moment over and over. Maybe he was lost, confused, or hurt. Maybe he was trying to get help but didn't know how. Or maybe he just wanted someone to notice him, to stop for a second in the endless night. Whatever the reason, I never found out. The police never found him either. Driving the rest of the way, the road seemed emptier than before, the night darker. I kept my speed steady, eyes scanning the shadows along the roadside, half expecting to see him again. But he was gone, swallowed up by the night and the silence. That night stayed with me long after I stopped driving that route. I told the story to other truckers and drivers I knew, but no one had heard of anything like it happening before or since. It was one of those strange moments that makes you realize just how unpredictable and eerie the road can be, especially when you're alone in the dark. The man's face, his movements, and the way he disappeared haunted me. I never saw him again, and I still don't know what he wanted or why he risked his life running like that. All I know is that sometimes the road throws things at you can't explain, and sometimes you just have to keep driving, hoping the next mile is quieter than the last. I pulled into the rest area just after midnight. The road behind me was empty, the highway silent except for the soft hum of my engine cooling down. I've been driving for hours and I needed a break. My back was stiff and my stomach was growling, so I figured I'd grab a snack and stretch my legs for a bit before hitting the road again. I parked my big rig in a spot under a flickering streetlight that barely cut through the darkness. The whole place felt dead. No other trucks, no cars, no people. Just empty asphalt and shadow. The air was thick with that cold, heavy quiet you get late at night in the middle of nowhere. The kind that presses down on you, making everything seem still and almost unnatural. I grabbed my insulated jacket from the passenger seat, pulled it on, and stepped out. My boots hit the pavement with a dull thud, echoing too loudly in the stillness. The rest area was one of those small ones, just a few picnic tables, a couple of porta potties, and the vending machines inside a little shelter that doubled as a waiting area. The whole setup was cheap and worn, like it hadn't been cared for in years. The fluorescent lights inside the vending machine shelter buzzed and flickered, casting uneven pools of cold white light onto the cracked concrete floor. I could see the rows of snacks and drinks lined up behind the glass, but the machines looked old and battered, with peeling paint and dents that looked like someone had kicked them in frustration a dozen times over. Still, they worked, and that was all I cared about. I walked toward the vending machines, the sound of my boots scraping against the rough concrete breaking the silence. As I got closer, I reached into my pocket and pulled out some change. I could feel my skin prickling like something was off, but I tried to shake it off, just the usual nerves from being alone in a dark place late at night. I told myself I was just tired and maybe letting my imagination run wild. I pressed the button for a bag of beef jerky and a soda, waiting as the machines clattered and clanked to spit out my snacks. As I bent down to pick them up, I heard it, a faint sound, soft and quick behind me. Footsteps. I froze and looked up, heart skipping a beat. The sound stopped. I spun around, scanning the empty parking lot and the shadowed tree line beyond it. Nothing. Not a single car. No movement, no sign of anyone. I shook my head, telling myself it was probably just an animal or my own ears playing tricks. I grabbed the snacks and started back toward my truck, but the feeling that I wasn't alone grew stronger with every step. I could feel eyes on me, like someone was watching from the darkness. I kept glancing over my shoulder, but all I saw were empty shadows. I tried to stay calm, but the hair on the back of my neck stood up and my pace quickened. The night air felt colder now, like it was sneaking under my jacket and freezing me from the inside out. The rest area was a small dot of light surrounded by blackness, and I was suddenly very aware of how exposed and vulnerable I was. I passed the picnic tables, empty and abandoned, and the porta potties, their doors swinging slightly in the breeze. The whole place seemed like it had been forgotten by time, a forgotten pit stop for lonely travelers like me. I kept telling myself to just get back to the truck and lock the doors. Then I heard again, footsteps, closer this time. Slow, deliberate steps, matching my direction, but just out of sight. I didn't turn around. I didn't want to see who or what it was. I just kept moving, heart pounding, breath catching in my throat. When I finally reached my rig, I slammed the door shut and locked it tight. The metal thud sounded so loud in the silence it made me jump. I sat behind the wheel, hands shaking slightly as I started the engine. I didn't even bother eating the snacks. I pulled out of the rest area fast, the headlights cutting through the dark road ahead. I kept checking the rearview mirrors as I drove away, but there was nothing behind me. No car, no person, just the empty road and the dark woods on either side. I never stopped at that rest area again. No matter how long my shift was or how tired I got, I wouldn't pull off there. It stayed burned into my mind. How alone I was, how the silence turned into something else, and how I knew without seeing that something was out there, watching. Even now, when I'm driving late at night and I pass by other rest stops, I remember that place. It wasn't ghosts or stories made up by scared people on the road. It was real. It was something waiting, something watching. And I wasn't ready to find out what it was. I was driving through rural Pennsylvania one night, the kind of night where the rain just won't quit. It poured hard enough to blur my windshield, and the wipers were working overtime, but no matter how fast they went, the world outside stayed a wet, gray smear. The roads were slick, and the glow from the highway signs bounced off the water pooling on the pavement. I was hauling a load of scrap metal, just the usual late-night route through some of the quieter parts of the state, miles away from any real towns or gas stations. My rig's headlights cut through the rain, but not much else was visible. I was tired, but not ready to stop yet. I figured I had a few more hours before I could pull into a rest area and get some shut-eye. That's when I saw him, standing on the shoulder, thumb out, soaked to the bone. A young guy, maybe late teens or early 20s. His clothes were drenched, plastered to his thin frame. The rain was coming down hard enough that he looked like he'd been standing there for a long time. I wasn't the type to pick up strangers, especially not hitchhikers, but something about the way he stood there, just staring down the road, made me slow down and pull over. I didn't open the door right away. I watched him for a second, the rain running off his face like rivers. His eyes were wide, but not scared or desperate, just empty, like he was lost or maybe numb to whatever was happening. After a long moment, I unlocked the passenger door and he got in without a word. The inside of the truck smelled like the usual mix of leather and old cigarettes. He didn't say anything, just sat there, dripping wet, water soaking the seat and floor mat beneath him. I gave him a towel I kept in the glove box, but he barely used it. He just stared out the window as I started driving again. The rain hammering against the windshield, the truck's tires hissing on the wet asphalt. I kept an eye on him in the mirror, but he didn't move much. His hands rested on his lap, fingers twitching every now and then. I thought about asking where he was headed, but the way he avoided eye contact made me hesitate. When I finally asked, his answer was silence. Just a long, empty stare out the window. It was strange, like he didn't want to be anywhere at all. We drove on for miles, the highway stretching empty ahead. The rain didn't let up. It felt heavy, pressing in around us, like the darkness was closing in. I kept checking the rearview mirror, mostly to make sure he was still there, still breathing. At one point, I saw his face shift in the reflection. His expression dropped like a mask had fallen away. His eyes darkened, his mouth tightened, and his whole face seemed to twist for just a second before he went back to staring out the window. It was quick, but it shook me. I pulled over at the next exit, a small, empty rest stop barely lit by a flickering street lamp. I told him to get out. He didn't say a word, didn't argue. He just slid out of the truck, still soaked, and walked off into the rain without looking back. I sat there for a minute, my heart pounding in my chest. That night stuck with me. I never picked up another hitchhiker again. I remember it like it was yesterday, even though it's been years. The night was cold and damp, the kind of cold that seeps into your bones after a long day of driving. I was on my usual route, heading south through the back roads of Pennsylvania. The rain had been steady all evening, the kind that makes the world look blurry and distant, like everything's underwater. It wasn't just rain, it was a storm rolling in slow, heavy, relentless. I'd been driving for hours, the truck's engine humming in my ears, the tires spraying water in long arcs behind me. The highway was almost empty except for the occasional car or tractor trailer far ahead. The radio was playing static most of the time, with the occasional country song coming through now and then, but mostly it was just the sound of the rain and my own thoughts. I was tired, but didn't want to stop yet. The next rest area was still miles away, and I figured I could make it. That's when I saw him, the kid standing on the side of the road, thumb out, drenched. His clothes clung to his skin, his hair plastered down. He looked too young to be out here alone in this weather, but what caught me was how still he was. Not waving at any cars, not shouting, just standing there like a statue. Normally, I wouldn't even slow down. I've been on the road long enough to know that picking up hitchhikers is a risk and you never know what you're getting into. I've heard the stories, some truckers get robbed or worse. But there was something about this kid, something that made me press the brakes and pull over. The rain was coming down hard when I opened the door, and the cold air hit me like a slap. The kid climbed in quickly, dripping wet. I could hear the water slapping against the floor mats as he settled into the seat. He didn't say a word. His eyes were fixed on the window, watching the rain blur the world outside. I grabbed a towel from the glove box and offered it to him. He took it, but didn't seem to care much. He just rubbed at his face and hair a little before tossing it aside. I fired up the heater and turned on the defroster to clear the windows. The warmth started to fill the cab, but the kid stayed quiet, almost like he was frozen in place. I tried to make conversation, asked where he was headed. Nothing, just silence and that same blank stare out the window. His face was pale under the rain, the lines sharp and tired. His eyes looked tired, but not sleepy. It was like he was carrying something heavy inside, but wouldn't let it out. The miles passed slowly. I kept stealing glances at him through the mirror. He wasn't looking at me or the road, just out into the rain. After a while, I thought maybe he was asleep, but his eyes stayed open, unblinking. Then, something changed. I caught it in the mirror. His expression shifted for a second. His eyes darkened. The muscles in his face tightened like he was holding something back, or maybe something inside him snapped for a moment. It was brief, but real, like watching a mask drop. My heart skipped a beat. I pulled off at the next exit, a small rest stop with flickering lights and puddles everywhere. I didn't say much, just told him to get out. He didn't argue. He opened the door and stepped out into the rain like it was nothing, walking away without a word or a glance back. I sat there for a long time after he left, the rain still hammering down on the truck's roof. My hands were shaking on the wheel and my mind was racing. I picked up plenty of people over the years, stranded drivers, folks needing a lift, but this was different. Something about that kid's silence, his sudden change in expression, and the way he just walked off like it was all normal stuck with me. That night, I made a rule. No more picking up hitchhikers, no matter what. The road is full of people and stories, but some things aren't worth the risk. Sometimes, silence and a glance in the mirror can tell you everything you need to know. That night was one of those times. I was parked at a small truck stop on the edge of a little town, the kind of place you don't hear much about on the radio or see in the news. It was the middle of the night, around midnight, and I was trying to get some sleep before the long haul ahead that would start before dawn. The parking lot was mostly empty, just a handful of trucks scattered around, and the glow of the street lights barely reaching the far corners. The air was cold and heavy with the smell of diesel and wet asphalt from the rain earlier that evening. My cab was quiet, the only sound the soft hum of the engine's heater keeping me warm in the chill. I had pulled in a couple of hours earlier, hoping to catch a few hours of rest before getting back on the road. I shut off the engine, rolled the windows up, locked the doors, and stretched out on my bunk. My eyes closed easily enough, but sleep was light, always a little on edge when you're alone in a place you don't know well. Truck stops might seem safe, but out here, alone with hundreds of miles behind and ahead, you can't let your guard down. You learn to listen to every little noise, every creak and groan of the truck settling on its suspension, every distant rumble from the highway. Around midnight, I was just drifting off when I heard it, a slow, deliberate set of footsteps crunching on the gravel outside. My eyes snapped open. The sound wasn't just a random noise. It was steady and close, coming from right outside my truck. I sat up in the bunk and looked out the window beside the cab. It was pitch dark, but the streetlights cast a dim, yellowish glow that reached just enough to show a shape standing there. The figure was tall and thin, standing still by the side of my truck right near the door. I couldn't make out much more than a shadowy outline. A person, no doubt. What made my skin crawl was the way they were staring directly at me through the window. The feeling was instant and sharp, like they were waiting for something, or maybe just making sure I was awake. My heart started pounding. I locked all the doors again, even though they were already locked. I pulled the curtains tighter, hoping to block the view. But when I looked back, the figure was still there, motionless, just watching. I told myself to stay calm. I'm a trucker, not a kid. I've dealt with all sorts of sketchy situations before, from angry drivers on the road to people messing with trucks at rest stops. But this was different. This felt personal, like that shadow was sizing me up, deciding if I was an easy target or not. Minutes passed, maybe 10, maybe more. It felt like hours. The figure didn't move or blink. It was just there like a statue. I kept my eyes glued to that window, watching every tiny movement. The cold sweat ran down my back, but I didn't dare look away. Then, just as suddenly as the figure had appeared, it was gone. 1 second it was there. The next, it was like it vanished into thin air. No sound, no movement, just gone. I scanned the parking lot, expecting to see it slip behind a truck or run off into the night, but there was nothing. The gravel was undisturbed except for a few scattered footprints from earlier, but none fresh. It was like whoever it was just disappeared without leaving a trace. I stayed awake for the rest of the night, too shaken to sleep. Every time I thought I was drifting off, my mind jumped back to that shadowy figure, standing silently in the dark, watching me. When the first light of dawn broke, I packed up quickly and headed to the diner attached to the truck stop. I needed to know if anyone else had seen something strange, or if I was just losing it. At breakfast, I ran into a few other truckers. The talk was low and serious when someone mentioned a string of robberies that had been happening in the area over the past few weeks. They talked about trucks being broken into at night, drivers waking up to find their doors forced open, wallets, electronics, and other valuables gone. The police hadn't caught the thieves yet, and everyone was on edge, especially those parked at this quiet little truck stop. Hearing that hit me hard. I realized just how close I had been to becoming another victim. That figure outside my truck wasn't just a random passerby. It was someone looking to rob me, maybe worse. The way they watched, waiting, could have meant they were planning their move or deciding if I was awake or not. After that, I made a mental note to always park near other trucks or closer to the station, places with more lights and people around. It wasn't about paranoia anymore. It was about survival. I knew the road was full of risks, but that night reminded me that danger could come silently, just outside your window, waiting for the right moment. I felt lucky that morning, lucky to have woken up, lucky the figure left without trying anything. But I also knew I couldn't count on luck every time. From then on, every time I pulled into a truck stop at night, I kept my doors locked tight, the windows shut, and my eyes wide open, ready for whatever might be lurking in the shadows. I was driving my old rig late at night on a lonely stretch of highway near Gallup, New Mexico. The desert was quiet, the sky clear, and the stars scattered like tiny pinpricks of light, but the road was empty. No other trucks or cars were around, just me and the endless black ribbon of asphalt stretching ahead. I've been on this route many times before, but this night felt different. The silence felt heavier, and the cool night, air creeping in through the cracked window, didn't help shake that uneasy feeling in my gut. The rig itself was showing its age. The engine rattled slightly, the cab smelled like old leather and cigarette smoke, and the dashboard lights flickered sometimes. The radio only picked up static, nothing but white noise on all the usual channels. I was tired, but I couldn't pull over. This was a route I knew well, and I had a schedule to keep. About an hour into the drive, I noticed a vehicle behind me in my rearview mirror. At first, it was just a pair of headlights far behind, but it quickly grew closer, too close. It was an old safari van, beat up and dusty, like something out of a bad road trip movie. The paint was faded, and rust patches spread over the wheel wells and doors. The tires looked worn, and the windows were grimy, reflecting the yellow glow from my truck's taillights. What really caught my attention was a piece of cardboard taped over the license plate. Whoever was driving didn't want to be seen or identified. The van kept pace behind me, then slowly started tailgating. The driver swerved a little closer, inching up near the back of my rig, then falling back, then pushing forward again. It was aggressive, like they wanted to intimidate me, to force me off the road. My heart started pounding. The highway was deserted except for this weird van, and the thought of what they might want made my skin crawl. I kept my hand steady on the wheel, but couldn't help glancing in a mirror every few seconds, watching the van's headlights flicker behind me. The tension built as the van moved closer and closer, matching my every turn, every curve in the road. I thought about calling the police, but I was in the middle of nowhere and the radio was dead. My phone had no signal. If I stopped, I'd be an easy target. So I kept driving, watching the road and the strange vehicle behind me. I reached down slowly under the driver's seat and pulled out the handgun I kept for protection. It wasn't loaded for show. I checked it quickly, making sure it was ready if I needed it. I kept it low, just enough to see if it might stop whoever was behind me. I wasn't going to start any trouble, but I wasn't going to be an easy mark either. The moment I let the handgun show through the side window, the van slammed on its brakes hard. The sudden red glow of its taillights lit up the dark road for a brief moment. It screeched, then peeled off the highway onto a dusty side road that led away into the desert. The van's headlights disappeared in the distance, swallowed by the night. I stayed on the highway, my grip on the wheel tight, heart still pounding like a drum. The silence after the van left was deafening. I didn't slow down. I kept driving, eyes peeled, ears listening for any sounds. Nothing came. The rest of the trip was quiet, but I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever those guys wanted wasn't going to be good. Later, when I made it into town, I stopped at a police station. I told them what happened, the van, the cardboard over the plate, the way they tried to force me off the road. The officer nodded, writing down my details carefully. He told me those guys had been spotted around the area before, trying to rob drivers by pulling them off the highway in the dead of night. The cardboard was a trick to avoid being caught on cameras or tracked by license plate readers. They didn't expect a trucker with a gun, someone ready to stand their ground. That's why the van backed off so quickly. They were looking for easy targets, not someone prepared to fight back. The whole thing stuck with me. Driving alone at night is always a little tense, but that night was something else. It reminded me that out there, on those empty highways, you never really know who's watching, who might be waiting for the right moment to make their move. It taught me to trust my instincts, to be ready for anything. After that, I made sure my rig was always stocked with what I needed. Extra ammo, a flashlight, a first aid kit, and I never hesitated to show I was armed if I felt threatened. I didn't want to be caught off guard again. Some nights on the road, the silence is just silence. Other nights, it's something you feel creeping up behind you, watching you, waiting for the right time. That night near Gallup was one of those nights. It changed how I looked at the road and the strangers who travel it, and it's something I carry with me every time I climb behind the wheel of my rig after dark. I was on a long haul, driving through a remote stretch of highway that cuts through miles of dense forest and empty fields. It was late at night, the kind of late where everything feels quiet except for the hum of the engine and the occasional flicker of the dashboard lights inside my truck cab. The highway itself was almost deserted, just the occasional headlights from another rig in the distance. It was one of those roads where cell phone service goes in and out, and the closest town was miles away. I've been on the road all day, tired but pushing to meet my schedule. When I finally pulled over a rest stop just before midnight, I was ready to shut down and get some sleep. The rest stop was a little gravel lot with a few trailers and a fast food joint that was closed for the night. There was a flickering street light that barely lit the place, casting long shadows across the parking area. After parking, I climbed in the cab, locked the doors, and lay back in the seat. I set the truck's heater low, enough to keep the chill off, but not enough to keep me awake. I reached over to turn on the CB radio, mostly to have some background noise, the kind of static and chatter that usually helps block out the silence. Trucker talk was usually full of jokes, weather reports, and the occasional warning about speed traps or road closures. It was normal, and it made the night less lonely. But then something different came through the static, a voice I didn't recognize. It wasn't loud or clear, just a crackle that sounded like it was barely coming through the radio. At first, I thought it was just interference or someone messing with the mic. But the voice was whispering. It wasn't the usual chatter. This was a quiet, urgent whisper, almost like a plea for help. I froze for a moment. The whisper was so faint I had to strain to hear it, but I could make out the words "help me" repeated a few times, broken up by static and crackles. It didn't sound like a joke or some prank. It was soft, desperate, almost scared. I keyed the mic and tried to respond, asking if anyone was out there and if they needed help. I waited, but the voice vanished as suddenly as it had come. The radio went back to normal static, then silence, then a few random truckers chatting like nothing happened. I sat there for a long time, staring out the window. The whisper stayed with me. I kept flipping through the channels, listening for the voice again, but it never returned. I even stepped out of the cab and scanned the rest stop area, but there was nothing out of place. No cars, no people, just the empty parking lot and the quiet road. I went back inside the cab and tried to shake off the feeling. Maybe it was someone playing a prank on the CB radio, or maybe my tired mind was playing tricks on me. I've been on the road long enough to know how your brain can start imagining things when you're alone at night. But even so, something about that voice didn't sit right with me. The next morning, I stopped at a diner to grab breakfast before hitting the road again. I was chatting with the waitress when a news story on the radio caught my attention. There had been a missing person report filed overnight. A young woman was last seen hitchhiking on the very stretch of highway where I had parked. Her car had broken down, and she was trying to get help, but she never made it to the next town. The details were sparse, but the timing and location gave me chills. I thought back to the whisper on the CB, the quiet voice begging for help in the middle of the night. It wasn't a joke. It wasn't static. It was her. The idea hit me hard. She must have been out there somewhere, alone and scared, using the only way she could to reach someone, the radio. Maybe she didn't have a phone or any other way to call for help. The forest lining that road was thick and deep, the kind that swallows sound and hides people in the shadows. If something had happened to her, no one would hear her cries unless they were right there, listening closely. I felt a cold weight settle in my stomach. The highway that seemed so empty and quiet now felt different, like a place where you could vanish without a trace. The trucks that passed me the next day didn't have the usual hum of comfort. Instead, there was a tension in the air, a reminder that out here, help isn't always close by. I reported the strange voice to the local sheriff's office when I stopped at the next truck stop. They took it seriously enough to keep it on file, but there was little they could do without more information. The missing woman's case stayed open for months, but she was never found. Search teams combed the woods, and investigators talked to people who might have seen her, but nothing turned up. Sometimes when I'm parked late at night on quiet roads, I tune into the CB radio, half hoping I won't hear that whisper again, but also half hoping I do. It's like a reminder that out there, someone might still be waiting for help. And it keeps me alert, knowing that on these roads, the silence can hide more than just empty pavement. I still don't know if it was a coincidence or if I really did catch the last moments of someone in trouble. But that night, that voice was real to me. And it's a memory that won't let me forget how fragile things are out here, how easy it is for someone to disappear when no one is listening. It was one of those nights on the road that stuck with me for a long time, the kind that digs into your mind and doesn't let go. I was hauling a load of timber from a small mill out in the northern woods to a lumber yard down near the city. It was late fall, just past the first frost, and the air had that sharp cold bite that wakes you up after hours of driving. The highway was mostly empty, which I liked. Less traffic, less stress. But this night, that empty stretch was what made everything feel wrong. I had been on the road for close to 10 hours by then. The cab was dark except for the faint glow of the dashboard and the headlights cutting through the night. The only sound were the steady hum of the engine, the tires rolling over the pavement, and the occasional creak and groan of the trailer behind me. The radio was off. I was tired but focused, eyes glued to the road ahead, watching for deer or anything else that might wander out. Around this time of year, animals get restless before the cold fully sets in. The highway I was on was a two-lane road that wound through dense forest for miles. I had driven it dozens of times before, but tonight something felt different. I can't explain it exactly. Just an odd silence, like the kind you get right before a storm. No birds, no bugs, nothing. The trees on either side looked black and heavy, their bare branches clawing at the sky. About halfway through my route, I noticed a car behind me, tailgating closer than I liked. It was one of those old sedans, dark color, with headlights that seemed too dim for the road. Usually, when someone rides my bumper like that, they want to pass. But this guy didn't pass. He just stayed there, barely keeping his headlights on, like he was trying not to be seen. I slowed down a bit, hoping he'd move around me, but he matched my speed exactly. I kept watching in my mirrors, and every time I glanced back, he was there, steady as a shadow. I didn't recognize the plate, but that's not unusual on a long haul. I try not to let it bother me. Sometimes you get strange drivers on the road, nothing more. The road curved ahead, and I took it slow, leaning into the wheel. The trailer shifted slightly, and I heard the soft clank of the chains holding the logs. The load was tight, but I always checked it twice before starting. I trusted my rig, and I trusted myself. Still, the presence of that car was unsettling. I passed a small rest stop with no one around. The lights were flickering, casting long shadows on the empty lot. I thought about pulling in to take a break, but the guy behind me stayed too close. I figured I'd keep going until I reached a better spot. Around the next bend, the road narrowed, and the trees closed in tighter, like they were pressing against the highway. The cold air made my breath fog up the side window. My hands were steady on the wheel, but my neck was tense. I try not to look back too often. Suddenly, the sedan's taillights blinked off. Just vanished. 1 second they were there, the next they weren't. I glanced in the rearview mirror, but all I saw was darkness behind me. I eased off the gas and braked gently, checking my mirrors again. No sign of the car. For a moment, I thought maybe I'd imagined it or it had turned off the road. But the road behind me was straight for miles, with no exits or side streets. My heart picked up. Something about the sudden disappearance didn't sit right. I shook my head and told myself to focus. Maybe it was just a glitch with the lights or a car that pulled into the woods. I tried to push the feeling away. Then, just as I was starting to relax, I noticed something odd on the side of the road. A figure standing just beyond the tree line. At first, it looked like a person, but the darkness made it impossible to tell. It was motionless, staring at the road. I slowed down. The figure didn't move or step back, just stood there, almost too still. My headlights barely reached that far. I flicked the high beams on and off, trying to get a better look, but the figure vanished. I wasn't sure if I'd seen it or if my mind was playing tricks on me, but the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I kept driving, my eyes scanning the edges of the road, waiting for something to jump out. Nothing came. Still, my grip on the wheel tightened. I felt like I was being watched. About 10 miles later, the radio crackled to life out of nowhere. Static at first, then a voice so faint I could barely hear it. No music, no normal broadcast, just this low, broken sound. I tried to turn it off, but the knob was stuck. The voice got louder for a moment, then stopped abruptly. The sudden noise shook me, and I pulled over at the next turnout, my heart racing. I cut the engine and sat in silence, listening to the quiet of the night. The radio was dead again. I took a deep breath and looked at my phone for the time. No signal. Of course, this stretch of highway was notorious for dead zones. I debated calling it a night and finding a motel nearby, but I still had miles to go. The company expected the load delivered by morning. After a few minutes, I restarted the engine and pulled back onto the road, eyes peeled. My mind was wired tight, every shadow and sound amplified. Half an hour passed without incident. I started to calm down, telling myself the night was just playing tricks. The road curved out of the forest, and ahead I could see the first signs of civilization. The dim glow of streetlights, the silhouette of buildings. I relaxed a little, even smiled, thinking I was nearly through the worst part. Then the sedan appeared again, right behind me, headlights off just like before. It was closer this time, and the silence felt heavy. I accelerated a little, but it matched my speed instantly. No attempt to pass, just riding my tail like a ghost. That's when I saw the windshield. The driver wasn't there. At least, no one was sitting in the driver's seat. I looked closely, squinting through the dirty glass. The seat was empty. I slammed on the brakes, and the sedan did the same, matching me exactly, perfectly synced. The engine roared behind me, and the tires squealed against the pavement. I shifted into reverse, backing up slowly, heart pounding. The sedan reversed with me, its empty shell a dark shape in the night. I was frozen between disbelief and fear. This wasn't possible, but there it was. Then the sedan's headlights flicked back on, blinding me for a second. I threw the truck into gear and slammed the gas pedal down, racing forward, the tires burning on the asphalt. The sedan didn't follow. It stayed right where it was, motionless, headlights shining like a warning. I didn't stop until I reached the highway exit. Once on the main road, with streetlights and other cars around, the sedan was gone. I pulled into a truck stop and parked next to a few other rigs. I stepped out of the cab, hands trembling, trying to make sense of what just happened. Other drivers were there, chatting and getting coffee. I wanted to tell someone, but didn't want to sound crazy. I stayed awake the rest of the night, watching my mirrors, refusing to close my eyes. The next day, I called dispatch and asked if anyone had reported a strange car or anything unusual on that stretch of road. No one had. I thought about what I'd seen, the empty sedan, the figure on the side of the road, the radio voice. Maybe it was a trick of fatigue, maybe stress or the cold, but I still don't know, and I don't want to find out. After that night, I always avoid that highway when I can, sticking to the main routes where there are more trucks, more people, and more light. Sometimes when I'm driving late and alone, I think about that empty car tailing me, matching every move like it was watching, waiting. I never saw it again, but the memory stays clear. That night taught me that the road holds its own secrets, and some of them don't have easy answers. You learn to keep your eyes open, your hands on the wheel, and your mind sharp, because out there, in the quiet dark, not everything is what it seems. I remember that night like it was yesterday, even though it happened years ago. It was one of those nights when everything felt off, but you couldn't quite put your finger on why. The air was thick, humid, even though it was late fall, and the kind of silence that falls when the world seems to be holding its breath. I was working a late shift at a small gas station way out in the middle of nowhere. It was one of those jobs you take when nothing else is available. The kind of place where the highway barely sees traffic and the only thing nearby for miles is a diner that shuts down at 9. The gas station was an old building, weathered and cracked, with flickering fluorescent lights inside that buzzed constantly. The kind of flicker that makes your eyes strain after a while. Outside, there was a single pump and a dim street lamp that barely lit the cracked pavement. Beyond that, just thick woods on both sides of the road. The forest was dense, mostly pine and oak, trees so close they blocked out most of the moonlight. The road was straight and empty, stretching into the dark for miles. That night, I was alone except for the occasional car that stopped for gas or snacks. Around midnight, it got quiet. Too quiet. The last car had left about an hour earlier, and I was starting to think about closing up early. I was tired, and my back hurt from standing so long behind the counter. The clock on the wall seemed to tick slower than normal, and every little noise felt louder in the silence. Then I noticed the power was flickering more than usual. The lights inside dimmed and brightened in uneven pulses, making the shadows in the corners dance like they were alive. I figured it was just a loose connection or the old wiring acting up again. The building wasn't new, and the wiring hadn't been touched in years. Suddenly, the entire station went dark. Not just the lights, but everything. The power had cut out completely. The humming of the refrigerator stopped, the neon sign outside went dead, and the air conditioning clicked off. It was so sudden it made me jump. I fumbled for my phone to use its flashlight, but there was no signal. Out here, that wasn't unusual, but in that moment, it felt like I was completely cut off from the world. I grabbed the small flashlight I kept behind the counter for emergencies and turned it on. The beam cut through the darkness, bouncing off the metal shelves and the glass of the cooler doors. I took a deep breath, telling myself it was just a blackout. Power outages happen sometimes in these rural areas. I moved slowly to the back room to check the breaker box, the floor creaking beneath my feet. The back room was small and smelled like old motor oil and dust. When I opened the breaker box, my flashlight beam caught the wires inside. Nothing looked burnt or broken, but I could hear a faint buzzing sound, like something electrical was trying to fight its way through. I flipped the main switch off and back on, but nothing happened. The station remained dark. I decided to call the power company in the morning. For now, there was nothing I could do but wait. I returned to the main room, switching my flashlight back on and trying to calm myself down. As I moved around, I noticed something strange. The front door, a heavy glass door with a lock that usually clicked tight, was slightly ajar. The last customer had left hours ago, and the wind was barely moving outside, so I was sure I'd locked it. I moved cautiously toward the door, the beam of my flashlight shaking slightly in my hand. The cold air from outside hit my face as I pushed it open a little more. Nothing seemed out of place at first. No footprints in the dust on the floor, no signs of forced entry. Still, the door swinging open by itself made my skin crawl. I stepped outside onto the cracked pavement. The air was thick with the smell of damp leaves and with smoke from a fire somewhere far off. The forest surrounding the station was a wall of black shapes, branches rustling gently. I felt like I was being watched, but there was no one in sight. The road was empty, the headlights of any passing car nowhere to be seen. I shut the door firmly and double-checked the lock. It held tight this time. Still, the feeling didn't leave me. I went back inside and sat down behind the counter, tried to ignore the growing unease. The flashlight in my hand was my only source of light, and the beam caught dust particles floating in the stale air. Minutes passed slowly, and then I heard it, a soft tapping noise coming from outside, like someone or something was knocking lightly on the metal side of the building. I froze. The sound was so faint I wasn't sure if I was imagining it. But then it came again. Tap, tap, tap. I stood up slowly, moving toward the window that faced the woods. The glass was dusty and smudged, but I could see nothing beyond the edge of the faint light from the street lamp. The tapping stopped as soon as I reached the window. For a moment, there was silence so complete it made my ears ring. Then from somewhere deeper in the woods, I heard a low growl. It wasn't a howl or a bark, but a slow, guttural growl that sounded close enough to send a chill down my spine. I backed away from the window, my heart pounding. I wasn't a city kid. I'd spent enough time in the country to know that sounds like that weren't normal this time of year. I decided to check the perimeter of the building to make sure nothing was lurking close. I grabbed a heavy metal pipe from behind the counter, something I kept for protection, and stepped outside with the flashlight. The night air was cold now, colder than I expected, and the woods seemed to close in around me. The light barely cut through the blackness beyond the pavement. I moved along the side of the building, shining the light into the thick brush. The tapping noise started again, this time from behind me. I spun around, swinging the pipe toward the dark, but saw nothing. The silence was thick again, but the hairs on the back of my neck stood straight. I made my way to the back of the gas station, where the woods pressed right up against the building. The tapping came again, louder now, like something was deliberately trying to get my attention. It wasn't random or accidental. Someone or something wanted me to notice. Suddenly, the beam of my flashlight caught a pair of eyes reflecting in the brush. They were low to the ground, about the size of a dog's eyes, glowing yellow in the dark. I froze and focused the light. The eyes blinked once and disappeared behind the bushes. The growl returned, closer this time. It wasn't just one creature. I could hear multiple low sounds, growls mixing with the soft rustling of leaves. I realized I wasn't dealing with a single animal. There was something else out there, something hunting or waiting. I took a step back, but my foot hit something soft on the ground. I shone the light down and saw a patch of wet, dark fur tangled in the weeds. It looked like the remains of an animal, maybe a raccoon or a stray dog. Something had killed it recently. My heart raced. I didn't want to stick around anymore. I turned and walked quickly back to the front of the building, locking the door behind me. I could still hear the tapping, now coming from the front window like claws scraping glass. My hand shook as I gripped the pipe. I stayed inside, pacing the room and trying to keep calm. The power was still out, and the night seemed endless. I thought about calling the police, but with no signal and no working phone, that wasn't an option. Hours passed, and just before dawn, the power finally flickered back on. The lights buzzed to life, the refrigerator hummed again, and the neon sign outside flickered blue and red. I felt relief flood through me, but the feeling was mixed with something else, an understanding that whatever was out there was gone now, but it hadn't been a mistake or an accident that brought it close. It had been waiting. When the sun started to rise, I locked up and left the station without looking back. I never stayed that late again, and when I did pass by during the day, I always felt the weight of that night hanging in the air. I never found out exactly what was out there in those woods, but some things don't need names to feel real. And some nights remind you that the silence can be more dangerous than any noise. My mom lives in a nice neighborhood. It's the kind of place where the streets are quiet, the lawns are trimmed, and people wave to each other when they pass by. It's not a gated community or anything fancy, but it's peaceful. She's lived there for years, and I've spent a good amount of time visiting her. Across the street from her house lives a family with a 12-year-old boy who has autism. He's unusually tall and skinny for his age. He's kind of lanky, with long arms and legs that make him look older than he really is. Whenever I came over to my mom's, I would see him outside playing in the yard. Usually he was tossing a ball around or running back and forth under the watchful eye of his caregiver. The caregiver was always nearby, a woman who kept a calm, steady presence while watching over him. I never thought much of it. He seemed like a quiet kid who just liked his routines. He didn't talk much, at least not with anyone outside his family or caregivers. When I saw him, he mostly kept to himself, absorbed his own world. Sometimes he'd look over at me when I walked by, but his eyes didn't really connect, like he was staring right through me. One afternoon, about a year ago, I went to visit my mom. I parked my car in her driveway and stepped out. It was early fall. The air had started to cool down, and the leaves were beginning to turn a soft gold and rust color. The sun was still warm, but the wind had picked up that day, swirling leaves around the street and tugging at the branches of the tall oaks lining the road. As I locked the car and headed toward the house, I noticed the boy across the street. He was standing near his front yard, looking down at the bottom of my car. At first, I thought maybe he was just curious or maybe even bored and watching something move under the vehicle. As I got closer, I realized he was pacing slowly around the car, moving his head from one side to the other, eyes fixed on the spot beneath it. Then I saw what he was doing. His ball had rolled under the car, and he was trying to figure out how to get it. I knelt down and reached under the bumper, feeling the cold metal under my fingertips, and grabbed the ball. It was a simple rubber ball, about the size of a grapefruit, scuffed and worn from use. I stood up and held it out to him. When I gave the ball back, something about the way he looked at me stopped me. His head tilted to the side slowly, like he was trying to understand something, but his mouth hung open slightly, and his eyes were empty. They weren't the kind of vacant that comes from just staring off into space. These were hollow, like he wasn't really there. I gave him a small, awkward smile, hoping to reassure him, but he didn't smile back. He just stared at me, holding the ball close to his chest with his long, thin arms, like it was something precious or fragile. I felt a sudden chill run down my spine, even though it was a warm afternoon. There was something off about the way he looked at me, something that didn't make sense. I decided not to say anything else and just turned to walk back into my mom's house. But before I closed the door behind me, I glanced back over my shoulder. The boy was still sitting on the curb across the street, staring right at me, as if frozen in place. That night, I told my then girlfriend what had happened. She was visiting me and listened quietly as I recounted the strange encounter. She shrugged it off with a soft smile and said, "Ah, he probably just wanted to say thank you, but was confused and didn't know how." Her explanation made sense. Kids with autism often have trouble expressing themselves, and maybe that was all it was, just a moment of confusion. Despite that, I decided to stay the night at my mom's house. It was autumn, and the Santa Ana winds were blowing hard that evening. I remember the sound of the wind rattling the windows and whistling through the trees outside. The air smelled dry and sharp. I was sitting in my old room upstairs, scrolling through my phone and trying to ignore the eerie creaks and groans the house made as the wind pushed against it. Around 2 a.m., I heard a trash can roll across the street, banging into a mailbox with a loud clatter. I was just about to put my phone down when I heard the house alarm beep. The sound was sudden and jarring in the quiet night. Beep, beep. The panel on the wall flashed red, and a voice announced, "Front door open." I froze for a second. The front door was known for being tricky. The strong wind sometimes pushed it open if it wasn't shut tight enough. Usually my mom made sure to double check it before bed, but sometimes, especially when the wind blew hard, it would pop open just a crack. I got up from my chair and headed toward the door, half expecting to see the wind blowing the curtains or maybe the door swinging in the draft. The hallway outside my room was dark, and I reached out, fumbling for the light switch on the wall. When I flipped it on, I nearly jumped out of my skin. Standing there at the top of the staircase was the boy from across the street. He was motionless, just standing, staring at me. The same blank, dead look in his eyes was there. His head tilted loosely to one side, and his mouth was open again, slack and expressionless. The long limbs that made him look so tall and lanky stretched out in the dim light. His skin looked pale, almost ghostly under the hallway light, but there was no explanation for how he got into the house. The front door was supposed to be locked, but there he was. I swallowed hard and tried to stay calm. My heart pounded in my chest like a drum. For a moment, I just stared back, trying to figure out what to do. Then, carefully, I reached out and took his hand. His fingers were thin and long, like spider legs, and ice cold to the touch, sending a shiver straight up my arm. He didn't resist. His hand felt limp in mine, almost as if he were a doll or a puppet. I didn't say anything. I just let him down the stairs and out the front door. The wind was still howling, tearing at the leaves and shaking the branches of the trees. The boy didn't look away from me as I walked him across the street. When we got to his house, the front door was wide open. No lights on inside, just dark shadows behind the glass panes. I showed him inside, making sure he went in safely. He didn't turn around or speak. He just shuffled inside like someone who had wandered off and didn't know how to get home. I locked the door behind him and hurried back to my mom's house. Once inside, I double-checked the locks on all the doors and windows. I turned on every light in the house, even the ones I usually left off. I tried to convince myself it was some kind of mistake, that maybe the caregiver had left the door open by accident and the boy had slipped out without anyone noticing. But deep down, something didn't feel right. I spent the rest of the night lying in bed, listening to the wind howl around the house and imagining that vacant stare. It stuck with me like a shadow, creeping into the corners of my mind. The next morning, I asked my mom if she or anyone else in the neighborhood had noticed anything strange. She said no one had reported anything unusual, and the caregiver had called to say everything was fine. But I knew better. There was something in those empty eyes, something cold and wrong that I couldn't explain. It wasn't fear of the boy himself. He didn't seem capable of doing anything malicious, but it was the way he moved, the way he looked at me like he wasn't really there, like he was something else entirely. I never saw him inside the house again, and after that night, I made sure to lock every door and window extra tight whenever I stayed over. The boy still played outside sometimes, his ball bouncing against the pavement, but I never got close again. I kept my distance, watching from the window, try to understand what I had seen. I've thought about that night often. What happened wasn't supernatural or part of some ghost story. It was something real and unsettling, an unexpected glimpse into a moment where normal boundaries broke down and something unknown stepped through the cracks. Sometimes, the scariest things aren't monsters or spirits. Sometimes, it's just the way a person can look at you and make you feel completely alone, like you're the only one who's really there. That boy, with his tall, lanky frame and empty eyes, stayed in my mind long after the wind stopped howling and the leaves settled on the ground. My teacher told me a story once, something that didn't happen to me, but it stuck with me. because of how real and raw it felt. He said it happened in a small town in Mexico, somewhere off the beaten path, where the roads twist and turn through the mountains like a snake. He had to get to a town a few miles over where his wife was waiting for him. But the only way was through a mountain road that the locals warned him about. They told him not to go at night because it was dangerous, but he thought they were just being overly cautious. Maybe the road didn't have guardrails, or maybe it was narrow and hard to see in the dark, but he thought he could handle it. He had driven mountain roads before, and it didn't seem like a big deal. So, one evening, after the sun had dipped low and the sky darkened into a deep blue, he started driving up the mountain road. The headlights cut through the dark like twin beams, lighting up the winding path ahead. The road was rough, with sharp bends and steep drops on either side. It was quiet except for the soft hum of the engine and the occasional rustle of wind through the trees. The air smelled fresh but cool, and there was a feeling of isolation, the kind that seeps in when you know you're miles from anyone else. The road was narrow, with barely enough space for two cars to pass each other, and no guardrails to stop a vehicle from slipping off the edge. As he drove, he noticed the sharp turns made it impossible to see very far ahead. Sometimes the road was littered with loose rocks and fallen branches, signs that nature hadn't fully given up on reclaiming the land. His mind wandered to his wife waiting in the next town, and he told himself it wouldn't be long before he was there. He was in a good mood, thinking the whole thing would be over soon. Then, without warning, his headlights caught something huge sprawled across the road, a massive tree trunk. It was thick, rough, and looked as if it had fallen recently, completely blocking the way. There was no way to drive around it. He slammed on the brakes, the car skidding slightly on the gravel. His heart started pounding. He got out of the car to check if maybe it was just some debris he could move, but it was far too heavy. Before he could think about what to do next, several men appeared seemingly out of nowhere. They were rough-looking, maybe 4 or 5 of them, their faces serious and eyes sharp. They quickly surrounded him and pulled him out of the car. The situation changed from confusing to threatening in a heartbeat. He realized he was dealing with robbers, people who saw him as an easy target, someone alone on a dark mountain road with no one around to help. They took his wallet without hesitation and started hitting him. The punches were hard and fast, not just to hurt, but to scare him into submission. Pain flared through his body, his face burning from the blows, but he tried not to scream or fight back too hard. The last thing he wanted was to make things worse. He kept thinking about his wife and how he needed to get home safe. At some point, in the middle of the beating, something unexpected happened. Instead of staying silent and scared, he made a joke. It was a simple joke, something light, something that broke the tension just enough. The men paused. They looked at each other and then started laughing. It was as if the joke reminded them of something human in him. The mood shifted from violence to surprise. They stopped hitting him and helped him up. The bruises and aches were still there, but the worst part was over. Instead of leaving him on the side of the road, they took him to a local bar in a nearby village. It was a rough place, filled with smoke and the smell of cheap liquor, where the townspeople came to drink away their worries. The men bought him drinks, and for hours they all sat together, drinking and laughing as if the earlier violence had never happened. My teacher said he didn't get his money back. He spent it all on those drinks. But at least he kept his life and walked away from the experience with a story he never forgot. He learned that sometimes humor can save you in the darkest moments, even when everything seems hopeless. The next morning, with the sun rising over the mountain peaks, he left the village. His body was sore, his clothes torn, but he felt something else, a strange kind of respect for the people who had beaten him, but then shown him kindness. He realized the mountain road wasn't just dangerous because of the sharp bends or lack of guardrails. It was dangerous because it could throw you into situations where survival depended on quick thinking and keeping your cool. He made it to the town where his wife was waiting. The road behind him looked calm in the daylight, but he never forgot the night when a tree trunk in the road changed everything. The warnings from the townspeople had been true. The mountain road was dangerous, but not just in the way he expected. I worked in an inpatient psychiatric unit at a children's hospital. It was the kind of place where the air always felt heavy, thick with the weight of pain, confusion, and desperation. We had kids who had been through more than anyone their age should ever face. And sometimes, those kids came in acting out in ways that could scare you, even when you knew it wasn't really them. It was just the trauma spilling out, raw and uncontrolled. One boy, in particular, stuck with me long after I left that job. He was one of the last patients I cared for before moving on. The boy was about 12, maybe 13, but the damage done to him made him seem older, worn down in ways no child should be. His file was full of notes about physical and sexual abuse, all the way back to when he was little. You could tell from the way he moved and spoke that he was carrying a load nobody should have to carry. When he first arrived, he was outgoing, almost too outgoing, like he was trying to fill a space inside that had been ripped away. But it wasn't long before his behavior got out of control. He was unpredictable, aggressive, and often acted in ways that were too dangerous for him or the staff. We always had to keep an eye on him, sometimes even 2 or 3 people close by. There was one night when I wasn't working, and what happened still sends chills through me when I think about it. Somehow, the boy got hold of a chain, no one knew exactly how, and started swinging it like a weapon, trying to break free from the ward. 2 staff members, 1 nurse and 1 psych tech, managed to corner him down one of the long, dimly lit hallways. The hallway itself was cold, the fluorescent lights buzzing softly overhead, casting harsh shadows on the peeling paint and scuffed floor tiles. The nurse stood firm, steadying herself while the tech kept a watchful eye on the boy's every move. The boy was wild, eyes wide, breathing heavy, muscles tense, and ready to strike. The nurse's voice cut through the tension with a calm firmness I still remember, telling him that he might be able to hit one of them, but not both. Somehow, they managed to disarm him without anyone getting hurt. No small feat considering how desperate and dangerous he was that night. A few nights after that, I was working a late shift. The night was quiet in the ward, but inside that quiet was always a low hum of tension. I was in the small reception area, a little space separated from the rest of the ward by a tall, enclosed counter. We kept the patients out of this space for safety reasons. It was our little bubble where we could work without constant interruptions. I was busy setting up charts, sorting paperwork, buzzing in visitors who came to see their kids. That boy was still there, still in the ward. He hadn't been discharged, and that night, he was on a kind of tear. The nurse had put him in a small timeout room to try to calm him down. It wasn't locked because we didn't lock kids in rooms. They could get even more agitated, and locking doors wasn't allowed unless absolutely necessary for safety, and even then, only for short periods. I was behind the counter, my head down over the papers, the sound of a nurse's voice fading into the background as I focused on my work. Then, out of nowhere, I heard a noise behind me. It was faint, but enough to make me turn around sharply. There he was, standing right behind me. His eyes were bleary and unfocused, like he hadn't slept in days. His breathing was heavy and ragged, chest rising and falling fast. His hair was tangled, and his clothes hung loose on his thin frame. But there was something in his expression that froze me in place, a wild desperation, like he was caught in a storm inside his own head and trying to find a way out. I stood up quickly, moving away from the counter to put some space between us. I wasn't trained to handle moments like this alone. I mumbled something stupid, like maybe I should get the nurse. I wanted to sound calm, but my voice probably cracked. My hands trembled slightly. Before I could move, he hit the button on the wall, the one that buzzes the main door open. The door was supposed to stay locked at night to keep patients safe inside, but he jumped onto the counter, reaching for the door as if it was the only thing between him and freedom. He was fast, but the lock engaged before he could make it through. He slammed down on the counter, eyes wild, like he couldn't believe he was trapped again. The whole scene lasted maybe 30 seconds, but it felt like forever. I managed to get the nurse quickly, and she came in, calm and steady, her voice soft but firm as she led him back to the timeout room. The rest of the night was her trying to keep him either in that little room or his bedroom down the hall. Neither place worked well because he was too restless, too angry, and the trauma was raw and everywhere in his movements. I thought about that night over and over, long after the ward was behind me. The way he looked right behind me, breathing heavy, like he was ready to break loose from whatever chains held him inside. What if he had had that chain again? What if he had tried to use it on me? There was no easy answer. The hospital was supposed to be a safe place for kids like him, but sometimes it felt like we were just holding the floodgates back with our hands. The weight of it all, the pain these kids carried, the way it made them lash out, the way it made me feel small and powerless in moments like that, stayed with me. I wonder where he is now, if he's still fighting that fight inside, or if he finally found some kind of peace. I don't know, but I do know that night behind the counter, the one when he was breathing so heavy and desperate, showed me just how fragile the line was between safety and chaos in that hospital. It was a reminder that no matter how much care we try to give, some wounds run too deep to heal overnight. Some battles are still raging inside, long after the doors close behind us. And sometimes the scariest thing isn't what we see or hear. It's what we don't, the darkness we carry with us long after the night is over. It was Halloween night when my sister and her friend decided to share this story about an old house nearby that was supposed to be haunted. They had heard about it through a few local kids and swore it was creepy enough to spook anyone. The house was said to be this big, two-story old place on the edge of town, abandoned for years, with broken windows and a sagging porch. It had that classic rundown look, perfect for a Halloween dare. My sister was excited to see it, and honestly, so was I. I figured why not take them out there, make it a little adventure. None of us really expected anything unusual, just a chance to hang out, maybe get a little scared in the best way. We piled into my car and set out just after dark. The air was cold but clear, and the streets were quiet except for the occasional distant sound of kids running around with plastic pumpkin buckets. The road to this place was narrow, lined with trees that clawed at the sky, their branches twisting in weird shapes under the moonlight. It felt right for Halloween, exactly the kind of place where you might find an old haunted house. When we finally reached the spot where the house was supposed to be, I slowed down, expecting to see the familiar silhouette of the house sitting on the hill, maybe lit up a little by the porch light someone forgot to turn off. But there was nothing, just a wide, empty field with tall grass swaying in the chilly breeze. The ground was uneven and looked recently disturbed, like someone had been digging or something. I stopped the car and looked at my sister and her friends. They looked confused too. They insisted that this was the right place. One of them pulled out their phone and double-checked the address, but it was correct. We sat there for a few moments, trying to make sense of it. The house should have been right here. After a minute, I decided to drive a bit further down the road. Maybe we had taken a wrong turn somewhere, or the house was further along. We drove slowly, scanning both sides of the road for any sign of the house, but all we saw was darkness and empty fields. The only light came from the headlights cutting through the night. Then we came to a bridge, or rather, what was supposed to be a bridge. It was completely gone, washed away by what must have been a recent storm or flood. The road just ended abruptly at a pile of rubble and mud. The river beneath it had widened, and there was no way to cross. I turned the car around slowly and started back the way we came. The night was quiet except for the hum of the engine and the crunch of gravel under the tires. My sister and her friends were quiet too, all thinking the same thing. Where was that house? As we neared the spot where the house was supposed to be, I noticed something strange. The headlights were reflecting off something ahead, but it wasn't the grass or trees. It was smooth, flat, and at just the right height like windows. I slowed down and looked closer. There it was, a large two-story house, sitting right where it was supposed to be. The windows caught the light from my headlights and glinted sharply. It didn't make sense. How had we missed it coming in? The field was empty before, now the house was there. The porch was sagging, just like my sister described, and the paint was peeling off the sides of the building. It looked abandoned for sure, with a front door hanging slightly open and curtains torn in some of the windows. We all stared in silence, trying to figure out if our eyes were playing tricks on us or if the house had somehow appeared out of nowhere. We stayed parked there for a few minutes, staring at the house when I noticed something in my rearview mirror. A pair of headlights appeared far behind us, moving fast down the road. It was a car coming right towards the bridge, the one that was gone. The car didn't slow down as it reached the broken bridge. It just kept coming as if the bridge was still there. I watched it cross over the spot where the road ended, headlights shining bright in the dark. My heart sank. That wasn't possible. I floored the gas and sped off without hesitation. I didn't look back until we were several miles away. My sister and her friends were silent, except for a few quiet breaths. The whole ride home was the most silent I've ever experienced. No one spoke a word, and the air inside the car felt thick with something we couldn't explain. Years later, we still talk about that night. Sometimes we laugh at how freaked out we were, but none of us ever forget that impossible sight. A car crossing a bridge that didn't exist and a house that vanished and reappeared like a trick of the light. It was the kind of thing you want to explain logically but can't, and maybe it's better that way. It was summer, and the rain had just stopped. The air outside smelled fresh and damp, the kind of smell that makes everything feel cleaner somehow. I was sitting inside my garage apartment, staring out the window at the small deck just beyond it. That deck, or carport thing, as I always called it, was just outside the windows, a wooden platform built against the side of the building. It wasn't very big, maybe 10 feet by 8 feet, and it had a cheap, thin roof that barely protected it from the rain. I never really liked to spend time out there. It always felt a little unsafe, like it could collapse if I leaned on it too hard, or maybe because it was just kind of dark and isolated. But it was sturdy enough to stand on if I was careful. That afternoon, after the rain stopped, the deck was soaked with water. It would look slick and dark, with little puddles in some spots. Leaves and dirt had blown onto it during the storm, and the corners were full of wet, mushy debris. I decided it was a good time to clean it off. So, I grabbed an old broom from the corner of the garage and went out to sweep. The broom was nothing fancy. Its bristles were worn down and bent, but it still worked well enough. I started sweeping slowly, moving the leaves and dirt toward the edges, trying to get the deck as clean as possible without slipping on the wet wood. The smell of wet wood mixed with the fresh air was oddly calming. The sky was still gray and cloudy, and the sun was hiding behind thick clouds, casting a dim light over everything. As I swept, I noticed small insects scurrying out of the corners and cracks in the wood. Nothing surprising. After rain, bugs always came out. But most of them were tiny ants or spiders that disappeared quickly. I kept sweeping carefully, trying not to disturb any big nests if they were hiding under the leaves or debris. After about 20 minutes, I was done. The deck looked cleaner, almost dry in some places where the wind hit it. I put the broom back inside and went back into the apartment. I still wasn't sure why I bothered with the deck. I didn't like spending time out there, but something about the rain and cleaning made me feel like I was doing something productive. The rest of the evening passed quietly. I had the windows open, the kind that slid horizontally because it was still warm outside. I like fresh air while I sleep. It makes the room feel less stuffy. The gentle sound of the wet, leaves outside brushing against each other, and the occasional drip of water falling from the eaves was soothing. I went to bed around 11 p.m., tired from the day, but feeling calm. The room was dark except for the faint light from the street lamp outside, casting long shadows through the windows. I closed my eyes, listening to the quiet noises of the night. Around midnight, I woke up suddenly. At first, I wasn't sure why. It felt like something was wrong. There was this weird, buzzing noise, a loud, sharp, zooming sound coming from somewhere near the windows. It was constant and growing louder, like a swarm of insects flying close by. I opened my eyes, confused, and froze for a moment. The sound was strange and terrifying because it wasn't something I'd ever heard night before. Then I felt it, something brushing against my face. It was soft but ticklish, and I instantly knew it wasn't anything good. I opened my eyes wide and looked around the dark room. I could barely see anything, but my skin was crawling. Then I felt something else crawling up my arm, something small and moving quickly. Panic hit me like a shockwave. I tried to shake it off, but there were more of them. I jumped out of bed, my heart racing so fast it felt like it would burst through my chest. I scrambled for the light switch on the wall and flicked it on. The sudden brightness revealed what I feared the most. There were hundreds of cockroaches all over the walls, the ceiling, and crawling through the open windows like the screens weren't even there. But these weren't just regular cockroaches. They were flying cockroaches. Big ones with shiny brown bodies and wings that made the buzzing noise as they flew around me. They were everywhere, streaming in from the deck outside, filling the air like a dark cloud. Their legs and antennae brushed against my skin as I moved, and I could see their tiny, quick movements on the walls and floor. The deck, which had seemed so calm and quiet just hours earlier, was now alive with these creatures, swarming like an army of insects ready to attack. I couldn't think straight. I screamed, a raw sound that tore through the quiet night. I ran out of the apartment, down the stairs, and out onto the street, flailing my arms to shake off the roaches that were stuck to my clothes and hair. The buzzing and crawling followed me as I ran, but slowly, as I got further away, it stopped. I kept running until I was sure there were no more cockroaches on me. I stood in the middle of the street, panting and shaking, looking back at the building. The windows were dark again, and the deck was silent. I didn't want to go back inside. I didn't even want to look at the place. The next morning, after I had calmed down a bit, I forced myself to go back. The sun was shining, and the air smelled fresh, just like before. I went to the windows of the apartment and looked outside. There were no cockroaches, not a single one. The deck was empty and clean, almost like nothing had happened. The screens were still in place, and there was no sign of the swarm anywhere. It was as if they had all vanished overnight, sliding back out through the windows and disappearing into the night. I checked every corner, every crack, every inch of the deck and the outside area. No cockroaches, no signs of their invasion. That night, I slept with the windows closed and the lights on. I never opened them again after that. I never went out onto that deck either. I never forgot that night. The terror of feeling those insects crawl on me, the buzzing swarm flying all around, the sense of being completely surrounded by something I couldn't control. It stayed with me. Even now, when it rains and I see that deck outside my window, I feel a cold shiver run down my spine. The deck looks harmless, quiet, and empty, but I know what's hiding just beneath the surface. And I know if I ever open those windows again on a rainy summer night, the buzzing might start again. The swarm could return, waiting to crawl over me once more. That night wasn't a nightmare. It was real, and sometimes the realest things are the scariest. When I was a kid, my family decided to do some work on our house. It wasn't a huge renovation, but enough to change the way the back of the house looked and added a converted attic. That attic was supposed to be my new room. Before the work, I had a small bedroom downstairs, but moving up to the attic felt like a big deal for me. It was more private, quiet, and honestly, I thought it was kind of cool to have a room so high up where I could almost feel like I was above the world. The attic space wasn't a typical bedroom. It was open planned, meaning there wasn't a proper door at the top of the stairs. The stairs just ended, and right there was my room. No wall to block the view, no door to close it off. You'd come up the stairs and just walk right into the room. This setup made things feel a little less secure, but also a little freer, like my own secret spot. In my room, I had an old radio placed at the foot of the stairs. It wasn't a fancy one, just a simple, slightly scratched up model, but it was enough for me to fall asleep to. I liked the radio because the noise made the silence less scary at night. I'd listen to music or sometimes talk shows, but mostly I tuned into a classical music station. The sounds were soft, calming, and the voices, usually just the host talking, were gentle enough to help me drift off. I was careful not to turn the volume up too high. My parents' room was on the same level as the radio, and I didn't want to disturb them. I remember always fiddling with the dial before bed, setting it low so it barely reached their room, but was still clear enough for me to hear in mine. Usually, the radio played only classical music or maybe soft instrumental pieces. The station rarely ever played songs with lyrics, which was something I noticed early on. If voices came through, they were just the radio host speaking between songs or during news breaks. I had listened to this station hundreds of times, and I never once heard a full song with words on it. It was always music without singing. One night, I was just about to fall asleep. I had the classical music playing softly. The house was quiet except for the radio's gentle background noise. I was feeling sleepy, my eyes heavy, when suddenly I woke up to a very loud and strange sound. It wasn't music like before. It was more like a distorted voice, singing in a way that didn't make sense. It was low and deep, warped like someone had recorded it poorly and then stretched the sound out. It took me a few seconds to realize where it was coming from. The sound was loud and clearly coming from downstairs. It filled the entire house, echoing through the walls and even making the windows vibrate slightly. The sound was so strange and out of place that it made my skin crawl. It wasn't just music. It wasn't any song I had ever heard. The voice was garbled, like a bad recording, but still loud and clear enough to fill every corner of the house. I froze for a moment, unsure what to do. My heart was pounding and my mind was racing. This sound was different. It wasn't the soft music I had been used to. It was something else, something wrong. I didn't want to believe it, but it felt like the radio had changed on its own, switched to a different station or some weird, corrupted tape that played something frightening. Without thinking much, I jumped out of bed and ran down the stairs, trying to find the radio. It was sitting there, exactly where I had left it, but now it was blasting that strange, distorted singing at full volume. I reached out quickly and turned it off. The silence hit me instantly, and I stood there for a long moment, breathing hard, my ears still ringing from the loud noise. I went back upstairs, but I couldn't sleep. My mind kept playing that weird sound over and over. I wondered what it was trying to say, if it was even a real voice or just a glitch. I kept listening carefully, but the radio stayed silent the rest of the night. The next morning, I checked the radio again. It was exactly as I had left it, tuned to the classical music station, set to the low volume I usually used. Nothing had changed. No signs that the radio had switched to anything else. My parents didn't seem to have heard anything, even though the noise had been loud enough to fill the whole house. When I told them, they thought I must have been dreaming or hearing things, but I knew what I heard was real. After that night, I stopped using the radio to fall asleep. Even now, if I ever wake up to the sound of music playing, no matter what kind, I get a sudden feeling of panic. That night, whatever that sound was, it left something behind, an unease I can't explain. Looking back, I think about how quiet and still the house was that night before the noise started. There was no wind outside, no cars on the street, nothing unusual. Yet the radio suddenly began playing that strange voice, loud and distorted, like something was trying to break through. It didn't feel like a technical problem with the radio. The station was known for its classical music, no lyrics or strange sounds. There was no reason for it to switch on its own and blast that noise. I never figured out what it was trying to say or if it was trying to say anything at all. The experience wasn't a ghost story or anything supernatural. It was real in the sense that the sound came from the radio in our home. It was just so alien and disturbing that I've never wanted to understand it fully. Some things are better left unknown, and that night taught me that lesson. To this day, I avoid using radios to fall asleep. I keep my room quiet, and when music plays at night, I listen carefully, because sometimes normal things can become strange without warning, and you realize there's no safe explanation for what you heard. That night, the house felt less like home and more like a place where something unknown tried to reach out, using the one thing I trusted to bring me comfort. And that's why I never want to hear that sound again. Just this past August, my brother and I were getting ready for a road trip to Canada. We had been planning it for weeks, packing, mapping routes, checking the car. But right before we were about to leave, we realized we needed to grab a few last-minute things from the store. Nothing major, just snacks, maybe some water, and a couple of small things we forgot. So we jumped in the car and headed to the nearest store. It was a warm afternoon, the kind where the sun is still strong, but you can already feel the day slowly cooling down. The roads weren't too busy, just the usual summer weekend traffic. I remember the radio was playing something mellow, and we were chatting casually about the trip ahead, all excited. As we drove down the street towards the store, something caught my eye out of the corner of my vision. There was a little white dog wandering down the side of the road. At first, I barely noticed him. I'm used to seeing dogs around here off-leash. People in my neighborhood often let their dogs roam a little in front of their houses or on the sidewalks. So it didn't strike me as strange that this small white dog was wandering around on his own. The dog looked kind of scruffy, but not badly, so more like he'd been outside for a bit. We didn't say much about it at the time. Maybe the dog belonged to someone nearby, or maybe he was just out for a little walk without a leash. The way he moved looked playful and careless, not frightened or lost. He trotted along the sidewalk, sniffing here and there, sometimes stopping to look around. After a few minutes, we pulled into the parking lot and went inside the store. The aisles were mostly empty, not a lot of people out on this hot afternoon. We grabbed what we needed, paid, and headed back to the car. That's when I looked out the window again and caught sight of the little white dog once more. Only this time, he was much further away from where we'd seen him originally. Instead of being down the quiet street by the store, now he was near a much busier road, a street with multiple lanes of traffic and cars moving faster. That's when a small wave of worry washed over me. The dog was wandering without any owner in sight, and now he was in a dangerous spot. I nudged my brother and pointed him out. "Hey, look at that dog," I said. "He's way over there now on that busy road." My brother frowned. "Yeah, no leash or anyone around. That's not good." We sat quietly for a moment, watching the dog as he sniffed around the curb, stepping close to the street. It wasn't just a dog out for a casual stroll anymore. It looked like he was lost or abandoned, or maybe even escaped from someone's yard. After a quick look around to see if anyone was nearby who might be his owner, we came to the same conclusion. No one was around, no one calling, no one searching. The dog was clearly alone, and with a busy road so close, it felt urgent. We decided to help him. I pulled the car over to the side, on a quiet stretch near the busy street, but still safe enough to stop. I got out and whistled softly to catch the dog's attention. At first, he looked back at me with bright eyes, almost like he was happy to see someone. He wagged his tail in a playful way, but then instead of coming to me, he started running away. It was strange. Normally, a lost dog would come to anyone who offered kindness, but this one seemed like he was teasing me, darting away just out of reach. I didn't want to chase him because I was worried he'd run into the street and get hit by a car. So I stayed where I was, watching, hoping he'd come closer on his own. Suddenly, my brother shouted from across the street, "Oh shit, he's crossing." I looked up just in time to see the dog darting across the busy road. My heart dropped. My brother had run across the street to try and catch him, to stop him from running any further into traffic. The dog zigzagged between the lanes, dodging cars and weaving through the rush of vehicles. It was like a nightmare unfolding in real life, everything moving in slow motion. Then it happened. The dog got hit. A big SUV barreled down the street and slammed into him just a few feet from where my brother and I stood on opposite sides of the road. The impact was sickening. I remember the sound, a loud thud, a high-pitched yelp that tore through the noise of the traffic. The dog's whole lower body was crushed. He let out one loud, sharp yelp that echoed painfully in the air. Then almost immediately after, he urinated and his body went still like stone. It was the kind of frozen silence that makes you realize how terrible something is. I ran to him without thinking. My hands were shaking as I picked him up carefully, trying not to hurt him more. His eyes were wide but dull, like he didn't understand what just happened. I could feel his small body trembling against me, barely alive. My brother joined me, and we quickly got back into the car. I tried to hold the dog steady, whispering soft words, though I knew it probably didn't help. We found his tag and pulled up the address of his owner on my phone, driving straight to the place. When we got there, the door opened and a woman stepped out. She looked at the dog immediately and screamed. Her face went pale and she dropped to her knees. I've never seen anyone react like that before. The raw shock, the helplessness, the heartbreak. She kept calling him her baby over and over, cradling him in her arms like a child. It was the worst part of the whole experience, seeing that kind of pain in someone else. I felt frozen inside, like part of me had shut down to avoid feeling the full weight of it. It was awful and real and terrible all at once. And the driver who hit the dog? They didn't even stop. No brakes, no slowing down, just kept driving like nothing happened. That made it worse, the coldness of it all. The way someone could just keep going after causing something so awful. That day stayed with me long after. Every time I hear a dog barking or see one wandering without a leash, I think about that little white dog and how quickly things can turn bad. I still think about the woman and how her world must have shattered in that moment. Sometimes I wonder what could have been done differently. Maybe if I had chased the dog, maybe if we had pulled him off the street earlier. But there's no use in that now. It's just a story I keep remembering when I hope no one else has to live through. When I was about 8 years old, I had a routine I followed almost every day after school. I lived in a small neighborhood where most kids played outside, and I had a close friend who lived a few blocks away. To get to his house faster, I would take a shortcut through a yard that belonged to a man who didn't seem to mind kids walking through it. The yard was on the edge of our street, with a tall chain-link fence lining the property. The grass was always a little overgrown, the kind that scratched your shins if you walked too close to the edges. There were a few trees spread out unevenly, their branches swaying slowly in the wind. I remember that yard because it always smelled a little funny, like old wood and something damp. The house itself looked pretty worn down. The paint was peeling off the siding, and the windows were covered with old blinds that were cracked and bent. You could tell no one really cared for the place anymore. Sometimes I saw an old rusty bike lying near the porch or a lawn chair with one leg shorter than the others. The front door was usually locked, and no cars were ever parked in the driveway. It felt like the house was waiting for someone who would never come back. Most of the time, I walked quickly through that yard, eager to get to my friend's place. The yard was the fastest way, cutting through a few blocks that would take much longer if I stuck to the sidewalks. The man who lived there never said anything, and sometimes I thought he didn't even notice me. Maybe he was gone a lot or just didn't care. The neighbors rarely talked about him either, so I never really thought much about it. One afternoon, it was late summer, and the sun was just starting to dip low behind the trees. I had finished my homework quickly and decided to go see if my friend wanted to play. I grabbed my bike helmet and walked outside, feeling the warm breeze on my face. The street was quiet, with only a few cars parked along the curb. I pedaled a little until I reached the shortcut yard. As I entered the yard, I noticed the grass was even taller than usual. Maybe no one had mowed it for a while. I could hear the faint buzzing of insects and the soft rustle of leaves in the light wind. Everything seemed normal, just like any other day. I followed the same path I always took, careful to avoid the patches of mud near the porch where the dirt had turned to soft clay after a recent rain. But then, something made me stop. I don't know what it was exactly. A feeling, maybe. I glanced up toward the house. The windows on the side facing the yard were reflecting the fading sunlight. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it. A giant black shadow, bigger than any person I had ever seen. It was standing behind one of the windows, completely still. I froze. The shadow wasn't like the normal shadows cast by trees or the house. It didn't look like a person either because it was way too large and too dark. It was just black, like someone had painted the shape of a person with thick black paint on the glass. But it moved ever so slightly, enough to make my skin crawl. My heart started pounding like a drum in my chest. I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to look closer to figure out what it was, but every part of me was screaming to run away. So I did. I turned around and ran as fast as my legs could carry me, my breath coming out in quick, shallow gasps. I didn't stop until I was safely back on the sidewalk, far from that yard. When I got home, I was shaking. I told my mom right away about the shadow I had seen through the window. I explained how big and dark it was, how it didn't look like a normal shadow at all. But she didn't believe me. She said I must have imagined it or maybe seen a trick of the light. My friends thought I was making it up too. They told me there was nothing there and that I shouldn't be scared of some silly shadow. But I knew what I saw. Days went by, and I tried to forget about the yard and the shadow, but it stuck with me. Every time I had to walk through that shortcut, my stomach twisted in knots. I would walk faster, keep my head down, and avoid looking at the windows. Sometimes I told myself that maybe the man who lived there had some dark curtains, or maybe a big coat hanging by the window that looked like a shadow. But that didn't explain the way it moved. One afternoon, about a week later, I decided to check if the shadow was still there. I waited until I saw no cars nearby and walked through the yard slowly. I stopped in the same spot where I had first seen it, looking up at the windows. But the shadow was gone. The windows looked normal, dirty but normal, reflecting the blue sky and some clouds. I felt a strange mix of relief and disappointment. Maybe I was finally right to think it was just a trick, but the feeling of being watched stayed with me, a heavy weight in my chest. Years later, even as I grew older and moved away from that neighborhood, the memory of that shadow never left me. I still think about it sometimes, what it really was, why it was there, and why no one else ever saw it. I never went through that yard again without feeling like something was just beyond the edge of my sight, waiting. I never found answers, and maybe I never will. But one thing is for sure, that shadow was real to me, and that day changed how I saw the world. It taught me that sometimes the things we try hardest to ignore are the things that don't want to be forgotten. I grew up in a house that was built in 1809. It was an old house, full of creaks and cracks that seemed to breathe history. My parents bought it after the previous owner, an old woman who was 89 years old, passed away. The house looked beautiful on the outside, with big windows framed by thick wooden shutters and a wide porch that wrapped around the front. Inside, it had tall ceilings, old hardwood floors, and those kind of thick, heavy walls that made you feel like you were stepping back in time. But from the moment we moved in, I always felt there was something off about the place, especially the basement and my bedroom. I don't really remember when it started, but from a very young age, I noticed things that just didn't make sense. It was like the house had its own life, its own way of moving and breathing around me. My bedroom was on the second floor, and it always gave me an uneasy feeling I couldn't explain. The closet in my room was the worst part. It was always much colder than the rest of the room, no matter what time of year it was. I remember standing in my room, feeling hot and sweaty from the summer heat, but whenever I opened that closet door, a sharp cold air would rush out like a breath of ice. The strange thing was, it also had a smell, something like a very strong perfume. It wasn't the usual musty smell you'd expect in an old house's closet. It was sharp, almost sweet, like those old-fashioned perfumes that grandmas wear. It was weird, but oddly enough, it didn't make me want to throw up or run away. It was almost like the smell was there to lure me in or distract me. The closet door moved on its own sometimes. It would close slowly if it was open, or sometimes creak open in the middle of the night. It wasn't just a little movement. Sometimes it slammed shut. I don't think it was drafts or wind, because the rest of the room stayed still. I remember lying in bed one night, staring at the closet door as it slowly creaked open on its own. I would freeze, too scared to move or breathe too loud. I'd sometimes feel like someone was sitting at the edge of my bed. It was never anything I saw clearly, more like a weight or pressure, like something was there, watching me sleep. The feeling was so strong, it made my skin crawl and my heart race. My parents often left me and my younger brother alone for a few hours because we were old enough to take care of ourselves. That's when I started to notice the smells in the house more. There was a window on the stairwell that looked out over our neighborhood. I can't explain why, but that spot always smelled like that same strong grandma perfume. It would come and go, drifting like someone was walking past the window just outside. When the smell was there, I could also feel a cold spot, almost like the air was frozen in one place. It wasn't just the closet or the stairs either. Sometimes, the smell would float through the main floor, following from room to room, always with that freezing cold patch of air nearby. It felt like something invisible was moving through the house. Things didn't just smell strange, they moved too. Items would disappear and then show up somewhere else, usually in odd places where they made no sense. I put down my book on the desk and come back later to find it on the floor across the room or tucked inside a drawer I never used. My brother's toys would be found in the kitchen, and kitchen utensils ended up in the living room. Nothing was ever broken or destroyed, just misplaced in a way that made no sense. It wasn't constant, but it happened enough times that my parents started to notice too. They always brushed it off as forgetfulness or one of us playing a prank, but it felt more than that. The basement was a whole other story. Older homes usually have dirt floors in a basement, and ours was no exception. The walls were thick, cold cement, cracked and damp in places, and the stairs were old and open so you could see underneath them. I never liked going down there. There was something about the basement that made my skin feel like it was crawling, even when I was just standing at the top of the stairs. Every time I had to go down there, I ran or asked someone to come with me. I never saw anything specific there, no shadows or figures, but the feeling was enough. It was a cold, hollow kind of fear. When I was about 14, my parents decided to renovate the basement and turn it into a living space, so they could move my bedroom downstairs. I was relieved at first, thinking maybe if I was closer to them, I wouldn't feel so scared. Moving my room into the basement changed things, but not in the way I hoped. For a while, everything seemed fine, but I kept feeling like someone was watching me. At night, I'd catch glimpses of shadows out of the corner of my eye. I'd quickly turn my head, but there was never anyone there. Sometimes I thought I heard footsteps or a soft breathing sound just beyond the door, but when I checked, there was nothing. Then the pounding started. The pounding was the worst. It came late at night, starting slow and quiet, like someone was lightly tapping on the wall inside the basement. But it didn't stay quiet. It grew louder and heavier until it was a hard pounding, like a fist or a hammer banging on the walls. It could go on for minutes or sometimes hours. I could never tell if it was coming from inside the walls or from the basement stairs. The noise was relentless and terrifying. I started sleeping with the lights on, but the pounding didn't stop. Sometimes it seemed to answer me, starting again just after I said something out loud, but I always told myself I was imagining things. The cold spots got worse too. There were places in the basement that were freezing, no matter how high the heat was turned up. The air would press in on me, thick and heavy, and I'd feel like something was standing right behind me. A dark, solid shadow. It was never a shape I could describe clearly, but I always felt it was watching me, waiting. I never slept well and stopped wanting to be in the basement at all. I started avoiding it, staying upstairs as much as I could, but my bedroom was down there now. My depression deepened. I felt trapped, like I was living with something I couldn't explain and couldn't get away from. I hardly left the basement, barely ate, and stopped talking to my family about what I felt. They didn't understand. I was home alone one winter night, and I went to the back porch to get a drink of water. The porch was cold, the glass door fogged with condensation. As I walked up the steps, 2 handprints appeared suddenly on the glass, like someone's palms pressed tight against the door. Right after, a breath mark appeared and then faded away. I froze, staring at the glass, unable to move or turn away. I called him the dark man in my head. He was always there, watching. I don't remember how long I stood there. It felt like forever. Eventually, I ran outside and stayed on the front porch all night. I didn't want to go back inside. When my brother came home in the morning, I went back upstairs and never talked about it to anyone. I wanted to forget that night, but the memory still sends chills through me. I was about 15 when I moved out of the house to go to college at 16. I did everything I could to get away from that place. I haven't stepped foot inside since. Years later, my parents divorced and the house was sold. I found out that the lady who lived there before them died in my old bedroom. Her husband had an accident in the basement, but no one ever said what exactly happened. He was not a kind man to her, and for what I heard, the house kept its secrets close. My parents only really started believing the house was haunted after I left, when strange things got worse for them. The new owners have stories too. Things being thrown, pictures falling off the walls, the same sickly sweet smells and cold patches. None of it ever felt like ghosts or spirits to me. It felt real, heavy and close. Something in that house wasn't right. Something that belonged to the past, but didn't want to leave. No one in my family talks about it. We never admit what happened. But every time I close my eyes, I can still feel that cold closet, hear the pounding, and see those handprints on the glass. The house is gone from my life, but its weight isn't. It's a part of me I carry, the kind of fear that stays long after the door has closed. This night was probably one of the most terrifying and exhilarating experiences of my life. It all started with what seemed like a simple, fun outing but it quickly turned into something I never expected, and something I still can't fully shake from my mind. I'm from a place where small towns are scattered between big cities, and the kind of trouble that comes with gang violence was no joke when I was in high school. It was so bad that the National Guard had to come in to help the local police keep the peace. That kind of atmosphere hangs heavy over everything. Even just going out to have fun meant dealing with sketchy areas where the usual hangouts, movie theaters, bowling alleys, places like that, were always in rough neighborhoods. It was like you had to accept a certain amount of risk just to get some entertainment. The Rocky reboot had just come out, and me and my two friends, John and Jack, decided to catch it at the local theater. John was my best friend, the silent, stoic type, built like a linebacker and the captain of our high school football team. Always calm, never one to panic. Jack was the opposite. Funny, cocky, always pushing people's buttons, but mostly harmless. He was into baseball and was a semi-pro pitcher now, though that wouldn't come into play until later. We got to the theater, watched the movie, and when it ended, we started walking back to our cars. Right away, we noticed this one car parked not far from ours. It was completely trashed. Every window was broken or cracked, dents all over the hood and doors, dirt shoveled into the driver's seat like some kind of sick joke. On top of it, someone had tipped over a trash can onto the roof and left a giant 7 to 11 Big Gulp cup standing upright right in the middle of the mess. The tires were all slashed. Whoever owned this car had pissed off someone real bad. Jack picked up a rock off the ground and looked at that cup. "Think I can hit that cup off?" he said with a grin, holding the rock like a pitcher about to throw a fastball. Me and John both told him no way. It was way too far, like 90 feet, and probably impossible. Jack, being Jack, didn't listen. He took the rock and launched it toward the car. We were about to head back to my car when we heard it. "Wyo, what the F-U-C-K?" Shouting and yelling coming from near the theater entrance. We turned around and saw a man storming toward the car. His face was red with anger. We had no idea who he was, but he was clearly the owner of that wrecked car, and he wasn't alone. We suddenly realized the trouble we were in. We had no proof we didn't cause the damage. The neighborhood was known for the shoot first, ask questions later kind of justice. It felt like a trap closing in. Without thinking, I jumped into the driver's seat and started the car. John got on the passenger side, and Jack climbed in the back. Jack was laughing, thinking the guy couldn't catch us because his car was trashed. But none of US had counted on him not being alone. We pulled out of the lot, and 5 minutes down the road, I saw it. High beams flashing in my rearview mirror. Someone was behind us, and fast. I took the next turn down a side street next to a gas station, hoping to lose them, but they weren't having it. Their car shot through the gas station and pulled out in front of me, blocking my path. They stopped, put their car in park, and the doors swung open. My heart dropped. I was sure this was it. We were about to get shot, or worse. My friends were yelling, but their voices were drowned out by the pounding of adrenaline in my ears. John kept saying they could handle it, that me and him could each fight 2 guys and Jack could help. I want to believe that, but what if they had guns? Knives? We had nothing but a watch, an ice scraper, and some half-melted milk duds from the movie. Then I caught a glimpse of something silver in the driver's hand. I couldn't tell what it was, but it wasn't something I wanted near me. My body went into autopilot. I slammed my foot on the gas and swerved around the first car. I cut back through the gas station, blew a red light, and hit the main road, trying to outrun them. They were behind us again. Jack was frantically calling friends, hoping to find a party where we could pull over and have some backup. John, cool as ever, started taking off his jewelry and stashing keys, wallet, and phone in my glove box. He told me to just pull over, saying we got this. I looked at him like he was crazy. The only thing I saw was danger. We hit a stretch of road with traffic, and the 2 cars chasing us got stuck behind a red light. I took advantage, turning onto a bigger road, pushing the gas harder, trying to shake them off. I floored it, hitting 95 miles per hour for 3 straight minutes. Jack finally shouted from the back seat that he couldn't see them anymore. I slowed down, feeling a small flicker of hope that we had lost them. But the next exit was a mile away, and suddenly 2 cars appeared behind us again, speeding fast, closing the distance. They were catching up. Jack was panicking now. The tension in the car was thick. In that moment, I did something dumb, but maybe smart. I acted like nothing was wrong, like we weren't being chased. I kept my speed steady, didn't look nervous, tried to pretend everything was normal. The first car passed me, then slowed down right before the exit, clearly realizing it was us. That gave me the chance to swerve suddenly, take the exit, and leave that car stuck behind, confused and caught off guard. Now, it was just the one car behind us. I kept pushing the speed high enough that the first car couldn't catch up. Jack, now calm but serious, was ready to pull over and face this group head on. But I wasn't convinced. What if they had weapons after all? We were deep into my home territory now, driving through back roads with barely any streetlights. The only thing keeping us going was the thought that these guys were out of their element here. We could make out 2 or 3 silhouettes in the car behind us, so maybe it was just a few guys. We thought about showing some guts and taking them on if we had to. Finally, I saw an open field next to the road. I decided to pull off. After 15 minutes of being chased, it felt like they might expect an ambush. I wanted to catch them off guard instead. We stopped the car, hearts pounding, breath heavy. John got out first, followed by Jack, and I stayed back, watching the car with my pulse racing. Jack started waving his arms like a maniac, pointing at the empty cornfield beside us. I was confused, yelling at him to stop, but then I realized what he was doing. He was pretending like we had backup waiting in the field, like there was a whole team of people ready to jump out and fight. It was ridiculous, and it shouldn't have worked, but it did. The gangbangers in the car glanced around, probably trying to figure out what was going on. Maybe they thought they were walking into a trap. Whatever it was, they didn't want any part of it. They put their car in reverse and peeled out of there like their lives depended on it. We all stood there, stunned for a moment, hearts still hammering, trying to believe what had just happened. Jack, my asshole friend, had saved us by pretending there was an ambush waiting for them in an empty field. We got back in the car, hands still shaking, and drove home in silence. The adrenaline started to fade, replaced by a deep exhaustion and relief, so intense it almost felt unreal. That night, I realized how close we came to something terrible. How quickly a night out could turn into a nightmare, and how sometimes the dumbest ideas, like waving your arms at nothing, can be the smartest moves to save your life. At the start of the year, I was put on a new medication for my type 2 bipolar disorder called lamotrigine. The doctors said it might help stabilize my mood swings, but I quickly noticed a few side effects that weren't sitting right with me. Some were minor, like dizziness and some tiredness, but others felt stranger, like my thoughts weren't as clear as usual. Still, I wasn't ready to stop taking it yet. I figured I'd give it some time and talk to my doctor soon. I lived in a duplex with my sister, who was away studying in Sydney for university. Most nights, the house was quiet. I liked it that way. But this one Friday night, there was a party next door. Loud music, people laughing and shouting. The kind of noise that usually would annoy some people. But for me, it was oddly comforting. It made me feel like I wasn't alone, like I was surrounded by life, even though I was just lying in my room. I went to bed around midnight, took my meds like I always did, and drifted off to sleep. The party was still raging, and the bass from the music vibrated faintly through the walls. I'd always found that background noise oddly calming. It was like a steady hum that helped me relax. But a few hours later, I woke up to something strange. The curtains were moving just a little, like someone was pushing them aside softly. I blinked and looked toward the edge of my bed. There, standing just beside me, was a man dressed all in black. He didn't move or say anything. He just stood there, looking at me. My heart slammed against my chest, and my throat went dry. I screamed, "Get out," and grabbed my pillow, throwing it at him in panic. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Then, just as quickly as I had panicked, my brain caught up, and I realized he wasn't real. He wasn't actually there. I started laughing, a nervous, shaky kind of giggle, like a scared schoolgirl. The relief hit me so hard that I passed out again. When morning came, I woke up feeling groggy and weird. The memory of the man was still fresh in my mind. I told my parents what happened. They were concerned but patient. They said I should definitely make an appointment with my doctor as soon as possible to talk about the medication and these experiences. I promised I would. Monday was still a few days away, and that night, the sky opened up with a huge lightning storm. I loved watching storms. They were rare where I lived. The flashes of lightning cut through the sky, lighting up the clouds like fireworks. My cat was bouncing around the room, acting wild as usual during storms. The way she chased invisible things and darted between furniture made me smile a little, even though I felt tense. The house was still empty. My sister was still in Sydney. My parents were at work. I stood by my bedroom window and pulled back the curtains to watch the storm. The rain hadn't started yet, but the thunder rumbled low in the distance. I looked out across the street and thought, just for a moment, how strange it would be if someone suddenly appeared under the streetlight that flickered with each thunderclap. Lightning flashed, and in that brief moment of brightness, I saw a figure standing there. Just standing, motionless under the streetlight, as if waiting. I quickly pulled the curtains shut, heart racing. The quiet that followed was thick and heavy. I called my mom. She asked if I wanted to come to their house. I said no, I was fine. Deep down, I knew what I was seeing wasn't real. I told myself it was just the medication playing tricks on my mind, or maybe the stress and fear getting to me. But still, it was terrifying because I remembered stories about my uncle. He had schizoaffective disorder, and I was scared I might be heading down a similar path. The next night, I stayed up late playing video games to keep my mind busy. I finally went to sleep around 5 a.m., tired, but feeling a little better. My cat was with me, as usual. At one point, I saw her walk into the laundry room. I followed to pet her, but when I turned on the light, there was no cat. Confused, I walked past the spare room, and there she was, curled up fast asleep on the bed. The hallucinations kept happening in small, unsettling ways. Things moved just out of the corner of my eye. Shadows shifted oddly. My cat seemed to vanish and reappear. At times, I wasn't sure if I was awake or still dreaming. Every noise from the party next door or the sounds of the street felt distorted. Sometimes the silence in the moments between noises was deafening, and my mind filled that space with imagined sounds or figures. By the end of the week, I decided enough was enough. I stopped taking the lamotrigine. It wasn't worth the fear, the confusion, and the feeling of losing control over my own mind. The hallucinations stopped almost immediately. It was like a heavy fog lifted, and I could finally breathe again. Living with bipolar disorder is hard. The diagnosis itself is scary, but being scared of your own mind, that's a whole different kind of terror. When the things you see and feel aren't real, but your brain insists they are, it's a lonely, frightening place to be. I hope sharing this helps someone else understand that sometimes the scariest monsters aren't outside, but inside our own heads, especially when medicine, the brain, and reality start to blur. In the end, I learned to trust myself again. I found doctors who listened and adjusted my treatment until I felt safe and clear. And I learned to appreciate the quiet moments and the real company of my cat, who stayed with me through it all. Those strange nights were a tough chapter, but they didn't define me. I'm still here, awake, aware, and more in control than I ever was on that drug. About 10 years ago, I used to run along this quiet walking path by a river. It was near a park that nobody really went to much. The park itself had a few soccer fields and a playground, but it was always empty or close to empty, especially on weekday evenings when I usually went for my runs. The path was right next to the river, with trees lining one side and the water on the other. It was peaceful and a good place to clear my head after a long day. I always parked my car in the lot near the soccer fields. The lot was big, but there was rarely anyone there. Maybe because the park wasn't that popular or because it wasn't well lit. I liked that about it, actually. The quiet helped me focus on running without distractions. One evening after a run, I was walking back to my car. It was dusk, the sky was fading into a dull orange and purple mix, and the air was cool and still. The wind barely rustled the leaves, and the river beside the path made a soft, flowing sound. I was tired but happy. I took my time, cooling down with slow steps. When I got to the parking lot, I noticed a van parked right next to my car. It caught my attention because usually the lot was empty. The van was older, white with some rust spots and a few dents. There was a man inside, sitting in the driver's seat. I gave him a small smile, just a polite gesture, as I unlocked my door and got in. I didn't think much of it at the time. Maybe he was waiting for someone or just passing through. I started the engine, pulled out of the parking spot, and began driving home. At first, I wasn't paying attention to anything unusual. The roads near the park were quiet, mostly residential, with trees and houses spaced out. I drove at a normal pace, the windows down a little to let in the fresh air. After a few minutes, I glanced in my rearview mirror and caught a glimpse of the same white van behind me. It was about a block away. I wasn't immediately worried. Sometimes people just happen to be going the same way as you. But after a minute or two, I noticed the van wasn't turning anywhere or stopping. It was following me. The feeling in my stomach shifted from calm to uneasy. I tried to keep cool and not panic. Maybe he was going to the same place as me, or maybe it was a coincidence. Still, it didn't feel right. I decided to take a few turns I usually wouldn't take. There was a route I sometimes took home that cut through a few less busy streets, narrow roads lined with small houses and yards. I turned left onto one of those streets and looked back in the mirror again. The van was still there, tailing me closely. I changed lanes, then made a quick right onto another street. The van followed again. I tried to keep calm, but my heart started beating faster. The streets I was weaving through had little streetlights, but not enough to see everything clearly. Shadows from the trees stretched across the road, and the houses looked dark and empty. I wasn't sure if anyone was home in those houses. I kept an eye on the van in my mirrors, checking its position at every turn. I knew I had to lose it, but the roads were twisting and quiet. I turned left, then right, then left again, tried to use the neighborhoods like a maze. The van stayed behind me, not speeding, but not slowing either. The driver didn't give up. I felt exposed and small in my car, the only thing between me and whoever was behind the wheel. My hands gripped the steering wheel tighter. My breathing was short and quick. I tried to focus on the streets, finding places where I could turn or hide. There were a few cul-de-sacs, empty parking lots, and dead ends I passed, but none offered a chance to break away easily. At one point, I slowed down and pulled into a small parking lot of clothes convenience store. I watched the van pass by without stopping. It was then I realized it wasn't just coincidence. This guy was following me. That hit me hard, and fear filled me. I got back on the road and kept driving, my mind racing through options. I thought about driving to a police station, a busy place, or even a friend's house, but the streets between the park and those places were too long and winding. I didn't want to risk leading him anywhere else or letting him know where I lived. Finally, after driving through several blocks of residential streets, I saw a few cars parked near a gas station that was still open late. The place had bright lights and people coming and going. I turned toward it, hoping to lose the van in the traffic or get help if needed. To my relief, the van didn't follow me into the gas station lot. It stayed on the street and stopped. I pulled into the station, parked under the lights, and stayed in the car for a moment, watching the street and the van from a distance. After a few minutes, the van slowly drove off and disappeared around a corner. I sat there for a while, shaking but relieved. I called a friend to tell them what happened and waited until I felt calm enough to drive the rest of the way home. That night, I kept my doors locked and windows shut, listening for any sounds outside. After that night, I never went back to run at that trail again. I didn't want to risk running into that guy or anyone like him again. The river path was peaceful before, but now it felt dangerous and unsafe in a way I couldn't ignore. Even now, years later, I remember the way the van stayed behind me no matter where I went, like a shadow that wouldn't leave. It changed how I think about quiet places and how even something that feels safe can suddenly become frightening. I learned that you can't always trust the silence or the empty parking lot. Sometimes, danger hides in plain sight, just waiting to follow you home. I grew up in a small town right in the heart of Amish country, Ohio. It's the kind of place where nothing much ever happens, and most days you could count the number of cars passing by on the main road on one hand. For most of us in high school, that boredom was the worst enemy. There was nothing to do after school, nothing to see, and no cool hangout spots like you'd expect in bigger towns or cities. So, naturally, we had to get creative. A few friends and I would spend hours searching for weird, off-the-path places to explore. Old barns, forgotten trails, and once this abandoned mansion a buddy of mine had heard about. The stories around town said it had been empty for decades, a real relic from the turn of the century, sitting deep in the woods, far from any road or neighbor. That night, after watching the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre at one of our houses, we all got the dumb idea to go check out that house. The movie had us on edge, and maybe we wanted to test ourselves or just scare each other more. There were 10 of us in total, a mixed group of guys and girls from our class. Everyone brought flashlights, and I decided to bring my old shotgun from the farm, just for laughs. I didn't expect to use it, of course, but I thought having it might help with the mood and maybe keep anything nasty from showing up. We parked the cars on a gravel road that ended in a small clearing right next to a slow-moving river. From there, we had to cross the river on some uneven logs. Nothing official, just the way locals have been getting across for years. Once on the other side, it was a long walk through dense woods, probably about a mile before the trees started to thin and the mansion came into view. The walk was mostly quiet, just the crunch of dead leaves and broken twigs under our feet. Everyone was joking a little, but you could tell we were all tense. The movie was still fresh in our minds, and the woods at night made everything feel 10 times worse. The air smelled like wet earth and rotting leaves, and somewhere far off, an owl hooted softly. When the house finally came into view, it was bigger than I expected. The mansion looked like it belonged to some old wealthy family. 2 stories, big columns on the porch, and lots of broken windows with shattered glass scattered on the ground. There was no driveway or path leading up to it. Grass and weeds had grown wild all around, and the porch was sagging under the weight of years of neglect. The roof was partially caved in, and the second floor had actually collapsed down onto the first floor in the middle of the house. Because of that, nobody could get inside safely, so we just circled around the outside. The house creaked with every wind gust, and the moonlight made the broken glass and peeling paint shimmer eerily. As we made our way around, one of my buddies stopped suddenly. He was staring at one of the side walls, and when we all got closer, we could see strange writing scrawled in what looked like black paint or maybe something darker, stained and smeared across the wood siding. The words were mostly faded and hard to read, but the last part was chilling. 10 sets of initials carved or scratched deeply into the wall. We each recognized the initials. It was all of us, every person in our group. The girls got quiet and started glancing nervously at each other. We were all already uneasy from the movie and the atmosphere, and seeing our initials there felt like a warning. No one wanted to stick around, but before we could leave, one of the guys on the other side of the house shouted, "Hey, I found something." Everyone rushed over, flashlights bobbing through the dark. He was looking into a broken window on the first floor. Inside, hanging from the ceiling by a thick, frayed rope, was a white wedding dress. It was dirty and stained, but the fabric still held that strange, ghostly glow under the flashlight beams. Across the front of the dress was a huge, dark red stain, like someone had spilled blood on it or worse. We all backed away, silent except for the crunch of our footsteps on the dry grass. Then, I felt the ground shift under my feet. Before I could react, a loud crash shattered the night. The earth gave way beneath 6 of us, and we dropped about 10 feet down through a hole that had been hidden by brush and leaves. We landed in a dark, dirt-walled room with the smell of rust and decay thick in the air. It wasn't a basement like you'd find in a normal house. It was just dirt and rock walls. The floor was hard-packed dirt, uneven and dusty. I shone my flashlight around, and what I saw made my blood run cold. The room was set up like something straight out of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre movie we just watched. There were old ropes hanging from hooks in the ceiling, rusty chains dangling from the walls, and tables covered with heavy tools, saws, hooks, and knives, all stained dark with what looked like old blood. Some of the tools were still shiny with rust, but you could tell they'd been used for something nasty. We didn't have time to take it all in. One of my friends screamed and started yelling for us to get the hell out. We scrambled to the hole, and the two guys who hadn't fallen down reached in to pull us out. Everyone got out except for one guy who twisted his ankle badly when we fell. The two strongest guys carried him through the woods back to the car. The rest of us stuck together in a tight group, walking as fast as we could back through the dark trees. I stayed at the back, walking backwards the whole time with my shotgun ready and safety off. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst. Every sound, the rustling leaves, snapping twigs, distant animal calls, felt like something dangerous stalking us. We didn't speak much, only quick whispers when someone tripped or slowed down. The weight of what we'd found made the silence heavier than any noise. The next day, a few of us went back to the gravel road where we'd parked. When we got there, 3 police cars were pulled up on the side of the road. Lights off, but clearly there for something serious. We pulled over and asked what was going on. It turned out someone had heard noises in the woods the night before and called the cops. When they searched the mansion, they discovered it had been a meth lab and a murder scene. The cops wouldn't say much else, but we learned the place was still being used by dangerous people, drug makers, violent criminals, or worse. The initials we'd seen scratched on the wall, they were probably a warning or a sick game to whoever had been inside. I never heard much more about what the police found or if they ever caught the people running the operation. But the thought of us stumbling onto that house while the meth lab was active still haunts me. The idea that the people we scared off might have been inside, or worse, that they could have caught us, it's a nightmare I can't shake. I still see that wedding dress in my mind, stained and hanging there like some horrible trophy. The ropes and chains, the blood-stained tools, the darkness of that dirt room beneath the house, it all feels too real. Since then, I've never gone looking for thrills like that. That night changed me. It made me realize how close we were to something truly evil, and how lucky we were to get out without more than a twisted ankle. It's the kind of thing you don't talk about much because people won't believe you, or they'll think you're exaggerating. But I know what I saw, and I know what could have happened. And that's why when I'm out late at night in those quiet woods, I still keep my shotgun close, and I don't take any chances. Because sometimes real horror isn't about ghosts or monsters. It's about the terrible things people do, hidden away in the darkest, most forgotten places. And sometimes, if you're unlucky, you find those places by accident. A few years ago, my wife started having night terrors. At first, we didn't really know what was going on. She would wake up almost every night, drenched in sweat, breathing hard and wide-eyed. At some point, she told me about what she was seeing, something she called a black ooze or blob figure standing right over her in bed. She said it was like a dark, shapeless shadow, but it had a rough outline, like a person. It didn't move much, just sort of hung there above her like it was watching. She was terrified, and it scared her so much she couldn't get back to sleep until the thing kind of faded or dissolved away. She tried to brush it off like it was just a weird brain glitch or some random bad dream, but it was happening every single night. No matter how much she tried to convince herself, it was nothing. The fear stayed with her. And honestly, watching her suffer like that made me worry too. I don't really believe in ghosts or anything supernatural. I'm more of a practical guy, but this was different. It wasn't just dreams or nightmares. It was something else, something that felt wrong. I remember sitting up with her one night, just holding her while she tried to calm down. She was shaking and whispering about that black thing. The way she described it was so specific, so persistent, I couldn't ignore it anymore. And then there was this strange feeling I got myself, like something was off in the room, even though I couldn't see anything. It was the kind of feeling you get when you know something bad is close, even if there's no proof. I'm usually scared of the dark. I'm not proud of it, but scary movies terrify me. After watching The Ring the first time, I had nightmares for days. So when my wife started having these night terrors, I was afraid for her. But my fear was nothing compared to hers. I hated seeing her like that, paralyzed by fear every single night. After a few months of watching her go through it, I decided I had to do something even if it meant facing my own fears. One night, I told her to switch sides of the bed with me. She didn't argue. She just wanted to sleep. I thought maybe if I was closer to her usual spot, I could protect her or at least understand what was happening better. We both lay down, and I told myself to be ready. I remember lying there, staring up at the ceiling, trying not to think about the dark. I repeated this thought over and over in my head, like a challenge. Bring it, you son of a bitch. I wasn't sure why, but it felt like I needed to fight whatever it was. Time passed, and I was drifting off to sleep when I suddenly woke up with a jolt. Something was right there, standing over me. It wasn't a shadow or a person. It was that same black ooze figure my wife had described so many times. It was kind of human-shaped, but also like a spilled ink blot that vaguely looked like a person. I could feel it pressing down on me, this horrible, sick feeling that wasn't physical pain, but more like a weight on my mind. It was cold, heavy, and full of this emptiness that made my skin crawl. In that moment, I didn't have time to think. I just knew I had to fight it. I felt this surge of anger and protective rage rise up inside me. I didn't want to be scared anymore. I wasn't going to let it scare my wife. I sent out this mental message, not in words, but like a powerful feeling. Get the hell out of my house. Stay away from my wife, or I will end you. It was like I was lashing out with my mind, pushing at this thing with everything I had. The figure wavered, like it was struggling to hold itself together. Slowly, it started to fade away, dissolving like smoke in the night air. When it finally disappeared, I was wide awake. My heart was pounding hard, but I wasn't afraid anymore. I felt calm, almost relieved. I lay there for a few minutes, breathing deeply and waiting for the rush of adrenaline to settle. After a while, I actually managed to fall back asleep. The next morning, I told my wife what had happened, but she thought I was just dreaming or maybe had a nightmare of my own. Still, I could tell she felt a little better, like maybe I had pushed something away for her. That night, and every night after, it never came back. The black ooze figure stopped showing up. My wife's night terrors vanished like they had never existed. It was the first time in months she slept through the night, peaceful and quiet. It's been almost 2 years now since that night, and she hasn't had a single episode. Looking back, I still don't have any proof of what I saw or experienced. There were no bright lights, no voices, no clear signs of anything supernatural. Just that awful feeling and that black shape. But that night changed everything. For once, I faced whatever it was and didn't back down. And for my wife, that was enough. Sometimes I think about what might have happened if I hadn't stood up to it. If I just rolled over and ignored it, would it have kept coming back? Would it have gotten worse? I don't want to know. What I do know is that fear only has power if you let it. And sometimes you have to fight back, even if it's with nothing but your own will. It was the strangest thing I've ever experienced, and I can't explain it. But it felt real. Real enough to change everything. And for that, I'm thankful. When I was a teenager, my world felt like it was falling apart. It wasn't just the usual bad days or teenage drama. It was something much darker. A relationship had ended, and it ended badly. Not with anger or fights, but with silence and emptiness. That silence didn't just fill the space between us. It swallowed everything inside me. Slowly, over weeks and months, the sadness I felt turned into a heavy weight that pressed down on me. I lost interest in things I once cared about. I stopped caring about school, friends, and even myself. I stopped caring about anything at all. My depression grew like a shadow that followed me everywhere, bigger and darker with each day. I felt numb most of the time, like I was floating outside my own body, watching myself go through the motions without really living. The worst part was the emptiness. It was so deep, I just wanted to feel anything, even pain or fear, something to remind me I was still alive. One morning, that emptiness pushed me to do something reckless. I was on my way to work, moving through my usual routine like a ghost. I got into my car parked in the driveway of my parents' house. The sun was barely up, casting long shadows across the street. I didn't think much about anything. I just wanted to escape the suffocating silence inside my head. Without looking, I slammed the car into reverse and floored the gas. The car shot backward out of the driveway, fast and loud against the quiet morning. My heart wasn't racing though. It was like I was on autopilot, the numbness hiding any real feeling. What I didn't see, what I almost destroyed, was just a few inches behind me. There was a mother pushing her child in a stroller on the sidewalk, right in my car's path. They were so close, I could have reached out and touched the stroller from my driver's seat. I saw her face in the corner of my eye as I backed out. A flash of shock, terror, and disbelief all mixed together. For a brief second, our eyes met. I don't think either of us could say anything. No words, just a frozen moment of horror. Then I hit the end of the driveway and slammed the car into drive, speeding away before I could fully process what had almost happened. The whole thing was over in seconds, but the weight of it hit me like a truck afterward. I pulled into the parking lot at work with my hands shaking and my breath coming fast and shallow. My mind kept replaying the moment. The mother's terrified eyes, the stroller so close I could have crushed it without even seeing it. I felt sick, like I might throw up. For the first time in a long time, I felt something, a raw, sharp fear that cut through the numbness. That morning changed everything. Before, I was so caught up in my own pain that I didn't think about anyone else. I believed my sadness was only mine to carry, that no one else could be hurt by it. But now I saw the truth. My depression didn't just hurt me. It almost hurt someone else, innocent people who had nothing to do with my pain. It wasn't just a private battle inside my head anymore. It had spilled out, almost breaking 3 lives. I spent the rest of that day in a fog. I kept thinking about the mother and her child, hoping they were safe, and didn't know how close they came to disaster. I thought about how easily everything could have been lost in an instant because I was lost inside myself. That moment was a mirror showing me the damage I could cause if I didn't fight to get better. I started to change after that. It wasn't easy. Depression doesn't just go away overnight, but I began to look for help. I talked to my parents about what I was feeling. I sought a counselor who helped me understand the darkness inside me wasn't permanent. Slowly, I found ways to feel again, to care about myself and the people around me. That day stayed with me for years. It reminds me how fragile life is, how one careless moment can change everything. It reminds me why I have to keep fighting, even when it feels like the world is too heavy to bear. Because my pain doesn't exist in a vacuum. It touches others, sometimes in ways I can't imagine. I'm still here, still working on myself. I know the past can't be erased, but I can choose how I live now. I choose to live with awareness, with care for the people around me, and with the hope that even in the darkest moments, there's a way forward. That morning wasn't just a near miss. It was a wake-up call, one I couldn't ignore. It showed me that depression isn't just my struggle. It's a responsibility, too, to keep myself safe so I don't hurt others. And that lesson, as hard as it was to learn, saved lives that day. It saved 3 lives, including my own. I've always enjoyed being out in the woods. Something about the quiet, the stillness, the way the trees move in the wind, it always helped me reset my mind. I'm not the kind of person who needs company on a hike or a reason to go out. Being in the woods has always been reason enough. That weekend, I was off work for 3 days straight, and the weather was perfect, cool enough that the bugs were mostly gone, but not cold enough to need winter gear. I packed light, just enough food and gear for 2 nights. I knew the forest well enough that I didn't bother with GPS. I had a paper map just in case, but I rarely needed it. I chose a section of forest that was a little out of the way. It wasn't a park or part of any designated trail system. It was just state forest land, big, quiet, and mostly ignored. There were some old logging roads that cut through parts of it and a few ATV trails, but I hadn't seen anyone back there the last couple times I visited. That's what I liked about it. No people, no noise, no distractions. I parked my truck in a small pull-off just off a dirt road and loaded up. My pack was about 30 pounds. I had my small tent, sleeping bag, a water filter, some jerky and dried food, and a .38 nub in a side pouch. I always bring the revolver. Not because I expect trouble, but because being alone in the woods comes with some unknowns. Wild animals, mostly. Coyotes, maybe a black bear. I never had an issue, but it gave me peace of mind. I started hiking around 10 in the morning. The sky was a dull gray, the kind of overcast that doesn't feel threatening, just flat. The air was crisp, and the leaves were thick on the ground. I was heading toward a spot I'd camped at once before, a small rise near a narrow stream. It wasn't on any trail, just something I found by bushwhacking. It took about 4 hours to reach it. I moved slow, taking breaks and watching where I stepped. There was no rush. When I got there, everything was just like I remembered. The stream had water flowing strong from the recent rains, and there was a good flat patch under a large pine that blocked some of the wind. I set up camp, boiled some water for noodles, and sat with my back against the trunk, eating slowly, listening to the water. The wind picked up a bit as the sun started to go down, and I layered up. The woods started to feel deeper around twilight, like they stretched farther away from the rest of the world. It was dark by 7. I climbed into the tent, zipped it up, and lay there reading by headlamp for a while. The forest was quiet, too quiet maybe. There weren't many animal sounds. No owls, no distant coyotes. Just wind. I didn't think much of it. Sometimes things are just like that. I woke up around 2 in the morning needing to pee. I got out of the tent, shivering a little, and walked a few yards away. I try not to shine my light around too much, just enough to see where I was going. I could feel the quiet pressing in again. No rustling, no water sounds, just that low kind of silence where your ears start making things up. I finished, zipped up, and turned to go back to the tent. That's when I noticed something. There were fresh scuff marks in the leaves. About 10 feet from the tent, in a curved line like someone had dragged their boot through the undergrowth. I froze for a moment, staring at it. I knew it hadn't been there before. I'm careful with my camp area, and I hadn't seen anything like that when I set up. I took a few cautious steps over. The marks weren't deep, but they were there. Someone or something had passed through recently, and not in a straight line. It curved like they were moving in a half circle around the tent. I scanned the tree line with my light, my hand drifting to the revolver. Nothing, just trees and darkness and shadows that didn't move. I told myself it could have been a deer or something bigger, an animal that passed through, maybe even sniffed around the tent. But I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't. I didn't sleep much the rest of that night. I kept my boots on and the revolver in my sleeping bag. Every time I started to drift off, some sound would bring me halfway awake. By sunrise, I felt like I'd barely slept at all. I made coffee, packed up quickly, and decided to keep moving. I didn't want to stay in the same spot. I'd originally planned to loop around and camp in a second spot deeper in, but now I just wanted to be moving. I wasn't ready to leave completely, but something felt off, like I wasn't as alone as I thought. By mid-morning, I was following a shallow ravine, looking for a spot to cross. The trees were thicker here, and the underbrush had less leaves, just tall gray stalks and fallen branches. I paused to eat and rest on a large flat rock near a dry creek bed. That's when I noticed something again. A single boot print in the mud. It wasn't mine. The tread was wrong, too shallow. And the size was different, longer but narrower. I stared at it for a while. It wasn't old. The edges were still sharp, not filled in by wind or rain. It pointed in the direction I came from. Someone had been following behind me, or had walked through this area before I got here. I felt my heartbeat in my ears. I stood up slowly and started scanning again. Nothing. But I felt watched, that kind of creeping sensation between your shoulder blades. I didn't see any more prints, but I wasn't exactly eager to hang around and look. I packed up and moved on, staying off any open ground. I tried to walk quieter than usual, checking behind me more often than I want to admit. By afternoon, I reached a rocky clearing that I remembered from the last trip. It had a decent view of the valley and some large boulders you could sit on. I hiked to the far side of it and sat for a bit, trying to calm down. My mind was running through possibilities. A hunter? Unlikely. Season wasn't open and I hadn't seen any sign of hunting camps. A poacher? Maybe. But even then, they'd probably avoid people, not follow them. It didn't make sense. I drank water and kept an eye on the tree line. The forest wrapped around the clearing in a half circle. I couldn't shake the feeling that if I turned my back, something would be there when I turned back around. I waited about an hour, trying to convince myself I was being paranoid. Finally, I got up and started walking again, thinking I'd find another spot to make camp before dark. I didn't want to sleep in a clearing. It felt too open, too exposed. About a mile farther in, I found a narrow trail I didn't recognize. It cut down along the side of a hill, weaving through the trees. It didn't look like it had been used much, but there were scuffs in the leaves. Not quite prints, just places where the top layer had been disturbed. I hesitated. Part of me wanted to avoid it. Another part of me wanted to know if someone else was out here. I followed it. The trail dropped steeply, then leveled out near a dry stream. The trees grew tighter together here, and the light was dim even though it was still afternoon. That's when I saw something that stopped me cold. On the far side of the stream, someone had made a camp, but it wasn't right. There was a tarp strung up between two trees, old and fraying. Underneath it were empty cans, beans, soup, some torn open, some crushed flat. There were clothes too, or scraps of them. A torn jacket, stained and muddy. A boot with the sole peeling off. And bones, small ones, scattered around the edges of the camp. I couldn't tell what they were from, but they didn't look like animal bones. Too clean, too white. Not in a pile, but spread around, like they'd been thrown or dropped without care. The air smelled wrong. Not strong, but sour, like something had been left out too long. I didn't move. I just stood there staring at it. It didn't look lived in, but it didn't look fully abandoned either. Like someone came and went, like they didn't want to be seen. I backed away slowly, not taking my eyes off it. Once I was out of sight of the camp, I turned and moved fast. Not running, but close. My heart was pounding, my ears straining for any sound behind me. I didn't look back. I didn't want to. I hiked for over an hour without stopping, not even for water. I knew I was off my planned route now. The terrain was unfamiliar, but I didn't care. I just wanted distance. I didn't know who was out there or what they were doing, but I didn't want to be anywhere near them. Eventually, I found an old logging road. It was overgrown, but still passable. I followed it west, hoping it would connect to a road or something familiar. By dusk, I still hadn't seen anything I recognized, but I wasn't willing to set up camp again. Not with the sky getting dark and my nerves shot. I kept moving into the evening, my legs aching, pack digging into my shoulders. I was running on adrenaline. The forest was closing in with the dark, everything turning to shadow. I kept thinking I heard footsteps behind me, branches snapping that weren't for me, a rhythm in the noise that felt too human. Around 8:30, just when I thought I couldn't go any farther, I saw headlights. Way off through the trees, probably half a mile, maybe more, but they were real. I turned toward them, cutting through the woods, stumbling over roots and rocks, my breath ragged. The lights grew bigger, brighter, and finally, I broke out of the tree line onto a gravel road. There was a truck parked there, an old Forest Service vehicle, doors closed, engine off. I looked around. No one, but there was a fire road sign up ahead, and I recognized the name. I was nearly 5 miles from where I started, but I knew where I was. I didn't stop moving until I reached a small Forest Service station about a mile down the road. It was closed, but there was a payphone on the side of the building. I called a friend, gave him the coordinates, and waited on the porch, revolver in my lap. I didn't report anything. The air was thick and heavy as I stepped into the deep woods that late afternoon. The kind of place where the trees grow so close together the sunlight barely touches the forest floor. The ground was damp from a recent rain, making the leaves and pine needles squish beneath my boots with every step. I've been out here a few times before, but never alone this deep, never this far from the trailhead where the map ended and the wild began for real. The woods had that smell, the mix of wet earth, moss, and decaying leaves. It's a smell you don't forget, the smell of quiet things living, growing, dying. The branches overhead twisted in strange shapes, some heavy with thick vines that dangled like ropes. I kept my eyes forward, focusing on the faint trail marked by broken twigs and flattened grass. But the path was more suggestion than clear route. It was easy to lose, easy to step off and wander into the shadows where the trees crowded in too tight. I was carrying a small backpack, water, some granola bars, a first aid kit, and a flashlight I hoped wouldn't be needed until much later. The sun was already dipping low, but I figured I had at least 2, maybe 3 hours of daylight if I pushed it. I wanted to reach the old logging road that showed up on the map about 5 miles in, a place I'd never been but had heard about. The road was supposed to run through the heart of the forest, and from there I could either circle back or follow out if I got tired. The first couple of hours were quiet except for the sounds of the woods themselves. Birds called here and there, mostly crows and woodpeckers, and every so often the rustle of a small animal scrambling through the underbrush. The deeper I went, the thicker the forest became. The trees towered like pillars, some gnarled and bent with age, others smooth and straight. The ground was uneven, with roots like giant snakes crawling across my path, forcing me to step carefully. After a while, the sun had dipped further, casting the forest in a dim orange glow. The temperature dropped just enough to make my jacket feel a little tight around my shoulders. I paused to take a drink from my water bottle, leaning against a moss-covered tree. The bark was rough and cool to the touch. Looking up, I could barely make out the sky through the thick canopy. A few thin clouds drifted by, but no stars yet. It felt like the whole world was holding its breath. I pressed on, eyes scanning the forest floor for signs of the logging road. According to the map, I should have hit it by now, but all I saw were more trees, more tangled roots, and a creeping sense that the forest was getting stranger. The air grew heavier, like the woods were closing in around me. The sounds I'd been hearing, birds, insects, small animals, started to fade until all I could hear was the thump of my own heartbeat and the soft crunch of leaves beneath my boots. At one point, I passed a large patch of broken branches and flattened grass that looked like something big had pushed through. Maybe a deer or a bear, I thought. But there were no fresh tracks, no signs of claws or fur. Just the trail disrupted and the smell of crushed leaves. A knot formed in my stomach, but I forced myself to keep moving. I didn't want to be out here after dark if I could avoid it. As the light faded, I decided to stop for a moment and pull out the flashlight. The beam cut through the dark like a knife, illuminating the twisted shapes of tree trunks and the thick underbrush. The forest felt endless and hollow. I took a deep breath, trying to calm the tightening in my chest. I reminded myself this was just a forest. Nothing alive wanted to hurt me if I didn't bother it. But even as I thought that, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I picked a direction that felt right according to the map and started walking again, the flashlight sweeping over the ground and trees ahead. Then I noticed something odd. The trail seemed to disappear altogether. No broken branches, no flattened grass, just unbroken forest, dark and silent. I stopped and turned around, trying to catch the last glimmer of daylight behind me. The woods looked like a wall, solid and unmoving. I tapped the map again, double-checking my location. I must have taken a wrong turn somewhere. The feeling of being lost settled in, cold and heavy. I tried to stay calm, told myself to breathe and think. I figured I could just backtrack to where I was sure of the path, then try again. But when I turned around to go back, the forest didn't look the same. The trees seemed closer, darker. Shadows stretched longer, and the quiet was different, almost too quiet, like the woods were holding something back. I took a few steps, but my boots slipped on a slick patch of moss and mud. I caught myself on a tree trunk, heart pounding. Suddenly, I heard a crack behind me, a sharp, dry snap of a twig breaking. I froze. The sound came from deeper in the woods, but close enough to make my skin crawl. I waited, every muscle tight. Nothing else moved. No animals, no wind, just silence. I shook my head and told myself it was probably just a squirrel or a falling branch. I turned the flashlight beam back on and kept moving slowly, trying to stay on some kind of path. But the more I walked, the more I felt like the forest was changing around me. Trees seemed to lean in, branches reaching out like fingers. The shadows were darker, and the air smelled different. Less of moss and dirt, more like something damp and sour, like rotten wood or wet animal. My pace quickened. I wanted to find that logging road before the sun disappeared completely. I knew I had to get out of these woods, but the trail was gone. The forest looked endless, an unbroken maze of trees and shadows. Then I saw something else. Tracks. Large footprints pressed into the soft earth. They weren't deer or bear prints. These were bigger, wider, with deep claw marks. I knelt down to look closer. The shape was unfamiliar, almost human, but not quite. The claws were sharp and long, like they belonged to some wild animal, but the prints were too tall to be from any animal I knew. I stood up quickly, heart racing. The tracks led deeper into the woods, away from any direction I recognized. I debated whether to follow them or turn back, but something pushed me forward, a mix of curiosity and that primal fear that sometimes makes people move toward danger instead of away. I followed the prints carefully, the flashlight barely lighting the way. The trees grew thicker, their branches tangling overhead so tightly I had to duck to avoid being caught. The ground sloped downward into a small hollow where the air was colder and damper. I could hear the faint sound of running water nearby, probably a creek or spring. The footprints ended at the edge of the hollow, disappearing into a dense thicket of bushes and brambles. I peered through the branches, but saw nothing except shadows and the occasional glimpse of broken twigs. The forest seemed to hold its breath again. I felt like I'd walked into a trap. My skin prickled with a cold sweat. The flashlight flickered for a moment, then steadied. I told myself to stay calm, but the silence was oppressive. I turned back slowly, trying to retrace my steps, but the forest had changed too much. The trees all looked the same, the shadows shifting with the last light of day. I had no idea which way led out. Panic started to rise in my chest. I took a deep breath and pulled out my phone to check the GPS. No signal. I wasn't surprised, but the realization hit hard. No way to call for help, no way to know exactly where I was. The sun finally set, and the forest went black except for my flashlight. Every step echoed in the quiet, and every sound was magnified. The rustle of leaves, the snap of branches, the occasional distant cry of an animal. I moved slowly, trying to keep track of landmarks, but the woods seemed to shift and close in. I decided to stop and set up a small camp. I found a clearing surrounded by thick trees, a spot that felt safe enough for the night. I gathered some dry wood and started a fire, the crackling flames casting dancing shadows on the trunks around me. The warmth was comforting, but it did nothing to ease the gnawing fear inside. I ate some food, drank water, and listened. The forest at night was alive in ways I hadn't noticed during the day. Tiny insects buzzing, the distant call of an owl, the rustle of a small animal in the brush. But beneath those normal sounds was something else, a low, deep thud, like something heavy moving just beyond the firelight. I kept my flashlight close, my hand on my pocket knife. I told myself it was just a bear or a large animal. But no matter how many times I convinced myself, the feeling didn't go away. Something was out there, watching, waiting. I didn't sleep much. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the dark shapes moving just beyond the trees. At one point, I thought I heard something walking around the edge of the clearing. I stayed very still, holding my breath until the sound faded. When dawn finally broke, the forest looked different in the light. Less threatening, more alive with the soft greens and browns of the trees and moss. I packed up quickly, feeling the pressure to get out before the woods could trap me again. I moved cautiously, trying to find any sign of the logging road or the main trail. I kept an eye on the sun's position to guide me roughly west